Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to a live Keeping Karlsson episode. Still feels like these are pretty rare, Brian. Soon we're gonna get back to doing this like every week, and it'll be normal. But yeah, thanks everyone joining us live here for episode 365.
3 Eric Karlssons. There it is. It's a magical episode.
Is that how
Hopefully
math works?
3 times Eric Karlsson's output last year would be like 105 points. I'd settle for 2.
Okay. Wait,
he had 35 points.
Right. Yes. You'd settle for 2 Eric Karlssons.
Yeah.
I don't know if I feel like if I'm drafting him, you almost want definitely a bunch.
I'd settle for 1.5 Eric Karlssons. 1.5 2021 Eric Karlssons.
We'll talk about Eric Karlsson in a little bit, or in a long bit, I guess. Brian, what did we decide, by the way? Are we doing this 2 shows or 1 show?
Well, let's start it as, do we need to decide now?
Kind of. Like if it's an episode, I should probably say what the plan is for the episode. Should I just say in my intro to the first episode, this might be 2 episodes? I think we could do it as 2 and release one tomorrow, one on Wednesday.
And then, one will probably be shorter. That's fine.
What's more overwhelming for people? Shams and Josh are here. Would you rather have 1 2-hour podcast in your feed or 2 1-hour podcasts a few days apart? I guess it's overwhelming for the people who haven't checked their feed for a while. They're like, oh, I have so many episodes. There's no way I could catch up. But maybe there's other people who are like, oh, 2 hours. I don't have time to listen to 2 hours. I guess either way, this isn't our target demo. If someone doesn't want to listen to us talk for 2 hours.
You're right. You're either gonna or you're not.
I kind of like the idea of having shorter episodes. So we'll do 2. If the second one's really short, well, we'll be really short. We got lots to talk about. Okay, let's start the recording. That's a big key. So the people watching live and on YouTube get the behind the stage little setup here. So we apologize. I hope you're gonna enjoy the show. By the way, if you are watching live on YouTube, obviously we appreciate it, and then we're glad that you're here and like our content. We would also really appreciate it if you still subscribe to the podcast on your Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever, just because we get judged, and our network Blue Wire is paying attention to our downloads, and our downloads are not including our YouTube views. So if you don't mind, download the show, but listen to us here, whatever. Okay. With that, Brian, let's start the recording. So whenever you're ready, I'll count it down. Are you good to go?
Yeah.
At your leisure. Okay, here we go.
Here we go.
3, 2, 1, record.
Recording. Yes. Hi, everyone on YouTube, by the way. Thanks for joining us. It's really nice.
We're going to have such a nice time today.
It's really nice. It's just nice. Is what,
Sure.
It's nice.
There's some people who might be like, oh, you see these streamers with thousands of people watching, and then, one could be jealous. But I honestly feel like it's more fun to have a small group of friends to talk hockey with. I don't want 1,000 viewers. So I'm happy.
Well, it would feel like a small group because it would still just be you and me.
But we wouldn't see all the chat messages. It would be flowing too fast. Right.
We'd have to turn on slow mode or something.
Or have a moderator to only show us the best messages. All right, let's do this.
How's my sound?
I think it's good.
Okay. Just is it supposed to be on the settings on the back?
Oh yeah, you want the cardioid.
The one that looks like an upside down heart, right?
Yeah, you want the heart, and then you want it to be facing, you want the front of the mic to be facing right at you.
Yeah, I'm good. I've got it all.
Yeah, obviously the closer.
Oh.
What's this? What's going on?
Well, the knob doesn't line up so well with the picture, so I realized I was not on the right setting.
Oh, well, so this might be an improvement.
There you go. Hi.
Wow, you were still moving the microphone while you were talking, so I couldn't tell. Try again.
Okay, hi. It probably sounds the same.
It's pretty hard to tell the sound quality just from a hi.
Sound worse. Hi. How about that? Does that help?
I don't know. How's your Audacity waveform look? That's probably most important.
Yeah. I feel like it looks good. Looks healthy.
Okay. That's good. It's a good, solid,
I feel good about
waveform.
It. Hello, Elon. Yeah, there it is.
Beauty. All right, guys, let's do this.
And Elon's just like that. Oh.
No, what? Just like that, what?
We're back up to 5 people watching.
Beauty. That's what we need.
Yeah, I was late. I was late to start, and Elon got really disheartened that there were 5 people waiting, and then 3 after 8 o'clock.
I thought I was so clever because I told Brian the show was scheduled for 7:45, but I actually scheduled the YouTube to start at 8, but still we're late. So next time I'll have to tell Brian.
I don't know how it'll be. It's your lifelong mission to get me to show up ready and on time.
Like, it's just like my life is like, I could start at any time. I just want to sit down and start. Just tell me in advance what time.
Next episode, 8:30.
Fine, but I don't want you then to be like, "Oh, I'm tired" at the end.
Well,
any of that.
What can I? Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll make it work.
All right. You know what, Elon? I give 110% of everything I've got, and that's still not enough. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, let's start. This is ridiculous. This is terrible banter. Thanks for being here. Okay, let's go.
Yeah. Yes! Welcome everybody to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by 2 guys who try our best to learn from our mistakes. And this episode will be no different. I'm your host, Elon Dubrovsky. With me, as always, the poobah of prognostication, the IPP MVP, the fantasy hockey robot himself, my good friend Brian Combe.
Hello, Elon. Hello, everybody. This is it. This is the official beginning, I think, of our off-season or end of off-season, our pre-preseason, or maybe even pre-preseason player analysis to get you ready for your drafts. Elon, you and I are already mock drafting with some of our patrons from our Discord server. We'll share some of the results as we go through this episode. We shared a ton on our Patreon cast that happened last week. It's a lot of fun to be here in this time of the season. It's like, oh yeah, that happened in 2020, 2021. And what am I supposed to do about it? Well, this episode, we hope to tell you.
Yeah, the plan for this episode is that if you recall a year ago, I guess not a year ago, like last December, we came up with our own projections with the patrons. We had the patron projection project where every day patrons were voting on their expected point paces for all the players in the league that we thought were going to be relevant. And we have those numbers. Now we have the results of what happened in the season. So we're going to split this episode up into 2 episodes, actually. We're going to start with 1 episode today where we're going to look at the players that the patrons were, and us, of course, were too low on. We didn't expect the big breakout that they ended up providing us. And then furthermore, in a future episode, which we're going to record also today for the people watching live, we're going to talk about the players that we were too high on and that totally let us all down. And so, yeah, we've got all this data. I've got a beautiful spreadsheet. You can check it out, by the way, keepingkarlsson.com/PPP for all the patron projection project results and how they compared to last season. So, yeah, it's going to be fun to kind of go through all these players and like see what we can learn, both in terms of like why we were wrong, like why did we have this terrible projection that turned out to be, you know, nothing like reality. And then also, of course, talk about the players themselves and discuss what we think they're going to do next year. They're going to be closer to their projection or their output from 2020-21.
I just want to get this plug out of the way early on. Elon, we've also opened Cupful registration. And so a lot of what we're talking about has probably direct implications for everyone's Cupful drafts. It's the mock draft format we're using too. If you don't know what the Cupful is, it is the biggest and best fantasy hockey league in the world. Over 300 managers last year across 4 continents and 14 countries, all levels of competition. Everyone is welcome, including you. If you're not yet a Cupful manager, you should join us. And to do that, just head to Cupful.com, KKUPFL.com. Registration's open now until September 13th. And that's all I'm going to do my best to leave the plugs at that. But we've been in heavy Cupful opening mode. So I just want to make sure it's out there.
Oh yeah, for sure. We'd love to have you. If you're listening to this podcast, you're into fantasy hockey, join our league, man. We're going to have a good time. Trust me. Okay, I guess let's also mention quickly, since you're speaking about plugs, we have to mention that we're proudly presented by DobberHockey.com, the #1 fantasy hockey website in the world. They've got their guide out. If you're playing in the Cupful or any league, you're obviously going to want to buy the world famous Dobber Hockey Guide, which gets updated all throughout the preseason. So check it out, DobberHockey.com. But okay, with that, Brian, I do have one gripe with you before we get into our planned content here. You talked about this slow draft that we were doing, and I feel like you've been throwing out a lot of compliments to other people's draft picks. You're never complimenting my draft picks. Just recently, in round 15, I had 2 goalies. Then I saw John Gibson get picked by Jeremy, and then I picked Ilya Samsonov at 206. And you're like gushing over the John Gibson pick, saying, "Wow, what a great third goalie to have." Meanwhile, I'm sitting here like an idiot. Like I thought I had a really good pick here, getting Ilya Samsonov so late as my third goalie.
I did mention Ilya Samsonov on the patron cast. We just mentioned we had one patron ask us who are going to be the draft day steals, and Samsonov was one of mine because if we remember looking into, so here, Elon, I'm complimenting your pick officially now.
Thank you.
I hope this counts. Coming into last season, remember the hype around specifically Samsonov and Sorokin had like equal hype as Russian goalies coming to make their North American NHL debuts after what we'd just seen from Igor Shesterkin. Of course, Samsonov with COVID did not get in any kind of rhythm or play that we would have hoped for and expected from him. And instead, Vitek Vanacek was the guy net. But I don't think he established himself, Vanacek, as a number one goalie or perhaps even a 1B goalie in the NHL with his play last year. So the door, I think, is as open this year for Samsonov to make an impact as it was last year when we were thinking that he had a chance to come in and be the runaway, high volume, number one guy on a cup contending team. So Elon Samsonov, after John Gibson, as late as you got him in our mock draft, brilliant pick. I love it. And I think he's a great, if you can get him as your third goalie, that's amazing value. That's just a flyer. You'll see how the first couple of weeks go. If Vanacek stays competitive with Samsonov or Samsonov doesn't run away with it, and you see it's going to be a tandem situation for a while, you cut bait. But Samsonov could just take this job right out of the gate. If pedigree and background and buzz and hype and career, like track record from what we know about these guys is anything to go by, I wouldn't rule out at all the possibility that you've got Samsonov, your straight up number one, and Vanacek, your straight up number two.
Yeah, that was actually a really fun discussion we had on that patron cast last Wednesday. Just in general, people, are asking about different sleepers, and Brian and I gave like a huge list of, who we think will be draft steals and sleepers and all of that fun stuff. And I think the big takeaway that I have is that last year was weird. And obviously we have to pay some attention. This whole episode we'll be talking about what happened last season. But at the same time, just remember, it was a weird season. Some players maybe overperformed or underperformed, small sample sizes, like COVID, like games being postponed. Like it was weird. So like it might be useful to find those players that were drafted really high going into last season that have like their stock has fallen, and those may be your draft steals this year. Some may not be, but the nice thing, like you said, Brian, is if they're not, then whatever, it's a late pick, no big deal. You drop them and pick up a free agent. But like these are the guys like your Samsonov, like the person I picked in the round 16 was Alexis Lafreniere, who is someone who was being drafted in the top 10 rounds in most leagues last year. People were expecting him to have this like huge breakout rookie season. It didn't happen. He had a strong end to the season though. And going into next year, I wouldn't be surprised if he, as a year older, I think he's going to be locked in now, or at least from the projections I've seen, he's going to be playing with Zibanejad, especially with, sorry, one sec, especially with Buchnevich out of the picture. So yeah, he's another guy that if you could get super late, super high upside, that's what you want, right? With the late pick, who wants to be boring and take like a Alex Tuck or a Sharangovich, as I'm seeing getting picked lately? Like, yeah, those guys might do something for you, but with my late picks, I'd rather have them have the chance to be stars, or because like worst case, if they're not, I could drop them. There's probably gonna be a ton of free agents that we're gonna be talking about in the first few weeks of the podcast that you're gonna be wanting to make room for anyways. Yeah,
once you've filled out all your positional spots in your draft, that's when it's a good time to take those swings. Like in my mind, if I'm filling a bench spot, I'm filling a streaming spot, and that's where I'm not looking. I mean, it's good to have one or two steady guys in case you have injuries that are unexpected, and then you can just plug them in. But like you said, Elon, you might be able to just find those guys on the wire, and your bench spots are your chance to take that one big swing, or two or three or four, depending on your format setup, and say, okay, I'm putting my money down, so to speak, on this player having a breakout. I've gotten Jonathan Taves really late in these mock drafts, or relatively late. So he's like, that seems like a pretty easy swing to take. I'm going to spoil one right now that I have lined up for my very last pick in one of our mocks. Elon, if you weren't going to pick him and I say his name, can you please still leave him for me?
Okay, deal.
Marco Rossi is going to be my very last pick, assuming that he gets to play with Kaprizov, who is under contract assumptively with Minnesota, and or Kevin Fiala. I think that could be really exciting because of how ready he seemed going into last year before long haul COVID, which I guess he has in common with Jonathan Taves. So now I'm like second guessing these picks. I don't know what kind of shape these guys are in, but this is the upside that I'm looking for with my very last picks in a draft.
Yeah, well, you're not going to get Rossi in the one we're in together because he was just taken by Matt G. So good pick, Matt, sniping Brian on the guy he wants. All right, Brian, so let's get into the plan for today, which is we're going to talk about all of these players that the patrons and ourselves who participated were too low on going into last year. So I just have the spreadsheet. I ranked all the players by like percent difference from their projection to what they actually did. And right at the top, the player who most outperformed the projection that we gave him is Alec Martinez. And I know we've already talked about him recently on the show because we did that episode where we talked about all the movement of all the teams and all the offseason transactions. And yeah, he signed this new contract with Vegas. But yeah, the patrons had him projected for 24.4 points on average. He ended up with 32 points in 53 games for almost a 50-point pace. But yeah, I got it again. Like we've talked about him. I think we ended up agreeing that we don't think he's going to be on this like 50-point pace next year, but still probably a really solid bet for around 45. So I had to mention him since he wins the contest as the player we were most wrong about in a positive way.
Yeah, and you would have seen this coming if only your vote held more weight in our patron projection project. We wouldn't have been so wrong on Alec Martinez. We had that over/under side bet at 40 points. And we, like you said, we just recently had this conversation about Martinez. But really what did tip him over the edge, if you don't remember, weren't listening, whatever. Actually, we did our whole series where we went through player movement in every division. If you haven't listened to it, go back. It's great. One episode per division. Anyway, Martinez had 9 power play points in 53 games this past season, which paces for 14 power play points, which would have been the second highest total of his career, the highest in the last 5 years. You add that to him doubling like his mid-20 season-long point paces from the few years prior to this one. Like he had no track record of being this big producer. I still think he's going to be under 45 points. Elon, I still think there's not a small chance that he's under 40 points, but maybe that's just me being stubborn. I don't expect us to be so wrong about him again, even if we have him at 40 to 45 points.
I mean, he's like clearly been given a different role in Vegas than he had on LA, either that or just the team scores more goals. So like, I
think it's the second one for sure. But also remember, like he's older. He's going to be 34 years old. He just played on a broken foot through the playoffs. I can't imagine him being able to be so effective.
I mean, I assume his foot is fine. I hope so.
I guess so.
All right, let's go to Dallas now. We have like a whole bunch of guys that we were wrong about because obviously Brian famously said that no one on Dallas is going to get any points. So obviously they made it their mission to make him look as bad as possible. There's Radulov, who I'm not going to bring up just because he only played like 11 games. But he had like 13 points in those 11 games. There's Jason Robertson, who we didn't even project. I didn't even think when we were trying to come up with the players that we should project next year. I didn't think Jason Robertson would be someone worthy. And of course, he ended up putting up 45 points in 51 games for a 72-point pace. If it wasn't for Kirill Kaprizov, he would have ran away with the Calder. And then the two guys that we did project and projected very, very badly are Joe Pavelski, who the patrons expected around 45 points from. Pavelski ended up with 51 points in 56 games. That's a 75-point pace. And then Roope Hintz, who the patrons projected for around 50 points. He ended up with over a point per game pace, 43 points in 41 games. Of course, Hintz was very frustrating if you had him in fantasy because a lot of games it wasn't announced if he was going to play or not until like a minute before puck drop. But for the games he did play, almost a point in every single game. So you can't do much better. So Brian, we've been doing mock draft, like you said. Hintz went 62nd overall after like around Sagan, Besser, Reinhardt before Marchessault, Perron, Forsberg. We're trying to give you a sense of like where people are currently seeing Roope Hintz. And then Pavelski, though, like fell, even though they had similar point bases. Pavelski fell all the way down. I got him actually myself at 122 overall, around like Atkinson, Verhaeghe, Hyman, Suzuki, Shen, Reinstrom. That's where Pavelski went. So clearly the vibe of our mock draft anyways is that both will fall, but Pavelski will fall like a lot more so than Roope Hintz. So Brian, I know that this was a common topic of our podcast last season. What's going on with Dallas? Can these Dallas guys keep it up? Now you've had the offseason to reflect. Like all throughout the season, you said they're going to slow down any minute, and they didn't. But now you have had time to reflect, think about whether, you know, there was something off about your analysis or whether you think you were spot on. So I'm curious to get your take on like Pavelski and Roope Hintz. Can they keep up the paces from last year?
So maybe this is just semantic, but they did slow down. At least Pavelski did. He went on a tear at the start, finished the season still with a stretch where he was a 60 to 65 point player, not a 75 point player. So imagine how torrid his pace was at the start of the season. I'm going to get into that in a minute, but I'm surprised you didn't mention, Elon, that when you picked Pavelski, I picked Alex Radulov, like 5 picks before that, and you were surprised. Pavelski was just sitting at the top of the auto-ranked draft board for rounds. I think it was like 3 or 4 rounds, and I'm like, I wasn't going to take him, but every time it was more and more tempting. I think you did well getting him amongst the Verhaeghes and Hymans and Suzuki's and Shens and Stromes. I think he can hang with at least half those guys, and I just trying to project Joe Pavelski has been a fool's errand for the last few years. He's had 3 crazy seasons in a row. He had this 40-goal pace in San Jose in 2018-19, his last year as a Shark, that I thought, and I was pretty loud about, it being totally unsustainable. And then the next season, his first in Dallas, he had a totally garbage year when he didn't produce, nobody produced. And then Pavelski had this huge season, just last one, when 2 key top sixers on his team missed essentially the entire season. And another one, Roope Hintz, was a game time decision every night, like you mentioned. It's just so strange. Like there's no way to really put a stake and find any solid ground in any of what's happened in the last 3 years for Pavelski. There's been so many up and downs and changes in context and jersey. And yet, as a 36-year-old, Joe Pavelski, like one of the crazy things about it is that he put up the second best offensive season of his career this past year in Dallas. His only better point pace was back in 2013-14, when he was already 29 years old. That marked the beginning of a stretch where Pavelski put up a 70 to 77 point pace 5 times over 6 seasons before that. Pavelski had been a solid 60-ish point guy, but really exploded, like I said, around 2013, 14. So the thing with Pavelski, that was his age 29 season where he really broke out. So he's always been this kind of late bloomer. And that tracks with the micro sample of his career as a Dallas Star. You look at his first season, brutal deployment, his lowest 5-on-5 ice time ever, and an inconsistent power play 1 role. His second season, and an inconsistent power play role. And then his second year in Dallas, his 5-on-5 time on ice goes right back up to what it was in his days in San Jose. Clear cut, top power play role. And of course, as I already hinted at, Sagan's absence, Hintz's occasional absences, and Radulov's absence, and Robertson initially not having, emerged right at the start of the season. All of that contributed to Pavelski getting all these minutes back in his second year that he'd lost in his first year. I guess this all begs the question, things are going back to Pavelski's playing once again in a new setting we've never really seen him in, because you've got Sagan back. That's one piece. Pavelski. Oh, sorry. Let me just find my spot here. Because you've got Sagan. Okay. Because you've got Sagan back. Although we look to what happened when Sagan returned at the end of last season, and we saw that Joe Pavelski stuck with Roope Hintz, and Tyler Sagan was paired with Jamie Benn, and then Robertson and Joel Kiviranta sort of swapped between those 2 lines as the third piece in either of those top 6 combos. So I think Pavelski, even with all this change in personnel around him, can still hold a spot where he's centered by either Tyler Sagan or Roope Hintz, and both of those places seem good. So now let's look beyond deployment, where, now that we've established, I don't think deployment is going to be a problem. So let's look at where most of this crazy season came from for Joe Pavelski. He based for 44 points at 5-on-5, which actually seemed perfectly reasonable. But as he enters age 37, you've just got to say, okay, once you get to a certain point, especially, the aging curves get steeper as you get older and older. So 36 years old to 37 years old, you got to dock him at least a couple 5-on-5 points there. But where we really have to look for the impact and the difference between last year and this year is going to be on the power play. That's where Pavelski really popped in 2021. He had the best power play production of his career with 13 goals and 8 assists with the man advantage. He pays for 31 power play points over 82 games and 13 goals. They came on 42 shots on the power play. So he converted at 31%, which is about double his career power play shooting rate. So if you regress that, which isn't automatic, but I'm just going to do it for fun, that you're already back to 65 points for Pavelski, which I think we'll see again. I would just be a little concerned that, again, he's another year older and he's seeing more competition for minutes. at 5-on-5, I think is going to be fine. But with Seguin, Radulov, and now Hintz I assume Hintz is going to regularly be in the picture. Does Pavelski lose? I'm curious to hear what you think, whether he loses his top power play role. Like, don't get me wrong. I still think Pavelski is still going to have a good season, but I think 60 points would be a safer expectation than anything above it. And I think that's a huge compliment for a 37-year-old guy who's never been given clear-cut elite billing. I don't think, like, I don't feel conservative projecting a 37-year-old Joe Pavelski for 60 points, and you might think so.
No, I think 60 sounds good. I think if you can get him there, that seems like a solid pick. And yeah, the question with the power play is interesting, right? You've got Hintz, Pavelski, Seguin, Robertson, Radulov. I just named 5 forwards that kind of seem like guys that deserve to be on the top power play. Oh, Jamie Benn, I think still sometimes gets top power play time. He plays a specific role. There's not room for all those forwards. So either Dallas goes with 50-50 or just one of these guys takes a hit. It's hard to imagine it being Pavelski, but to be honest, it's hard to imagine it being any of these guys I just listed. So we'll have to do it. We haven't done one yet. A Dallas beat writer series, Dallas beat writer interview where we can try to learn a little bit more. I guess we'll find out soon with training camp coming. But yeah, I guess that's a reason to maybe be a little bit concerned about any of these Dallas forwards, just because someone, and maybe, at the start of the season, they might try something, but if the power play is not working, like there's a lot of people that could potentially get dropped because they have a lot of options of players who you'd think should be capable of being a top power play guy. But in general, Brian, if you're saying 60-point pace for Pavelski, I'd imagine that's not going to be the highest on the team. So I'm really excited to now hear what you think about Roope Hintz. And I guess overall, can we say now that Dallas is no longer this low-scoring team? If we've got Hintz, Pavelski, Robertson, Seguin, Radulov, how could Klingberg, Heiskanen, how can this be a low-scoring team, right?
Well, it's funny because they also let go of Andrew Cogliano at the end of this season, and he was like a centerpiece of their checking line that they leaned so heavily on. And at the same time, you've got Jason Robertson now in the picture, help filling out that top 6. So I kind of wonder if Dallas is ready to turn a corner and be like, yeah, we have enough offense. We don't just need to shut it down defensively. Also, they don't have Ben Bishop back there anymore, who worked perfectly for that system. And I don't know if they feel like they can totally rely on their goalies, which wouldn't be a reason to let go of, your third line center, who, again, you rely on so hard in Andrew Cogliano. But it's nice to see that there is some offensive upside in Dallas. And like you said about that power play thing, just keep in mind for all these stars, if they don't end up on the top power play or if they split, there's considerable downside too. Like Joe Pavelski at 60 points, it's lovely. There's still a chance that he ends up at 45 points somehow because of just how up and down he's always been. But also, there just might not be room for him to produce more than that. But
I even left out a name, by the way. Josh is reminding me, Gurianov, another offensive stud that can end up producing big on this team.
Yeah. So, but you asked about Roope Hintz, right?
Yeah.
And so looking at his numbers, I see Hintz had a fantastic year that was obscured by the fact that he was never reliably healthy. The most frustrating guy to roster. In fact, I advocated trading him sometimes, like when we were asked for advice for a lesser player, just so you didn't run the risk of losing, a game, like of having him locked in a roster spot one night when he's not actually playing and just dealing with that frustration. But when he was playing, Hintz really benefited from Jason Robertson's huge shooting. His 5-on-5 on-ice shooting percentage was up. But to Hintz's credit, he was the primary assist on a lot of those goals. He did a lot of creating, and there's no obvious coattail riding or anything. He was helping. Jason Robertson gets the credit because he put the puck in the net, but a lot of the time, Roope Hintz was the guy behind the goal. But still, maybe a few extra goals. Hintz's lines on average of 1 extra goal per 60 minutes at 5-on-5 compared to their expected output, which is, say, a goal every 4 games, which is about 20 goals over 82 games more, like 20 goals more than expected that Hintz's line saw. And he was a participant on about 70% of points while he's on the ice. That's 14 points. If we want to regress Hintz from his actual goals to expected goals and use the rest of his numbers to calculate, that's 14 points less for Roope Hintz. He also saw some potentially unsustainable shooting success on the power play from himself and his line mates. He scored 6 times on 23 shots. That's 26%. His teammates shot 22%. So there's some reasons to think, Hintz overperformed last year, but I'm not at all disregarding him because of all this. To me, it just means that his 86-point pace last year is probably the high end of what we can expect from him this year. Like Pavelski, Hintz also has Radulov and Sagan in the picture to take some minutes away, I imagine. Look, last year, Hintz went from 14 minutes a night all the way up to 18 minutes a night. I'm curious to see if he lands in the middle of that with the return of all these other guys, or maybe he does hold on to 18 minutes a night. We'll have to wait and see. But the one thing I really like about Hintz is that he's 24 years old. He seems like a really good player. And I see him as a legit threat for 70 points. We're just going to have to watch carefully to see how things play on the depth chart. Like if he's tied to Pavelski, as he was last season, and Pavelski slows down, then you just have to hope Hintz can create with Jason Robertson or Alex Radulov as the other guy on his line to help pick up the slack.
Yeah, overall, I'm just getting excited about Dallas here. Josh is bringing up a good point in the chat room. Like, we have enough players here. We could have 2 even power plays. They might as well do that, right? They have Klingberg and Heiskanen, who are both great power play quarterbacks, and we've named like 9 forwards that might be good enough to get significant power play deployment. So it'll be really interesting to see what Rick Bowness does next year. He's going to have to maybe try doing something a little different. Brian, you bring up the goalies. It's wild, right? They've got Holtby that they signed. They've got Hudobin. Then they have Ettinger, who probably is going to start in the minors now because they signed Holtby. I don't know. Well, whatever. I guess they have their reasons. And then Bishop maybe comes back at some point next year. Obviously, they're not banking on that. So yeah, it's an interesting team. Dallas Stars. I'm curious to see what they're going to do. And in general, Brian, we've named all these forwards. Who are we drafting first? If you're picking a Dallas forward to draft first in your draft, is it Hintz? Is it Pavelski? Is it Sagan? Is it Robertson? I maybe for you it's Radulov after our slow draft. Who's the Dallas Star that you think you would take first among the forwards?
It's nuts. I think the only thing I know for sure, and I know I'm like a classic Pavelski skeptic, but he's going to be last of the group. And to me, that's the actually only clear piece in this ranking. I think I'd go Sagan, then Hintz, then Robertson, then Radulov, and then Pavelski. It's really hard though. To me, Sagan is still the number one just because he has the biggest upside. I think his upside is higher than Hintz and higher than Robertson. But he's also like a question mark. He didn't play very much last year. It's been a while since he looked good. So there's a lot to wonder about this Dallas team. And they're one of the teams I'm most excited to see how the first month shakes out because of all we've mentioned about the depth chart. And it is a close pack of players here. What do you think? How would you rank them?
Yeah, it's hard not to just take Sagan first because he's been so great for so long, though it's also hard not to take a Hintz or Robertson since they're on the upswing and had such great seasons. I don't know, Brian. I honestly don't know. I'll defer to your list for now.
No, I don't know either, but I made a list.
Yeah, I agree with your list. I'll just say that. By the way, this team looks good, right? I guess goaltending is a question. Like, just because I told you a bunch of quantity doesn't mean it's necessarily quality, especially after Hudobin's here last year. But like their defense also, don't forget they've got Heiskanen, Klingberg, Esa Lindell. They signed Ryan Suter, who's still really good, I think. Yanni Hapanka, that guy that was on Anaheim last year and got all those hits. Hakanpää. I apologize. I guess I also said Sharangovich at the start. I know it's Sharangovich. So if we want to start correcting all the mispronunciations, this might be a long episode. But yeah, I don't know. Here, Fantasy Tidbits is saying Robertson first. So maybe I'll agree. It's really hard. It's going to be a fun team to watch. But okay, let's move on from Dallas now. Let's go to our next mistake. And that is Justin Schultz, who the patrons projected for 28 points. It's almost like, why did I even put him there? I'm sure people were thinking, why are you asking me to project this nobody, Justin Schultz? He had like a bad season with the Penguins in 2019-20, didn't get re-signed, so he left as a UFA. Washington signed him. I don't know if people remember this. He had 27 points in 46 games. It's a 48-point pace for Justin Schultz, like making him like rocket up our list as the third most defeating his projection. So Brian, is there any chance that this was sustainable and Schultz is worthy of being drafted? Like, to me, he's not even on my radar. Like, going into preparing this episode, I wasn't even thinking of him in our slow draft. But now I have to ask, like, should I be drafting him with my next pick if I want to get a depth D?
So in the past, Justin Schultz has always been someone with upside and with like, he could be a power play one quarterback, but has never really found himself permanently in that role aside from, I think he did it 1 year. It was his first full season in Pittsburgh. But since then, he's been this reliable, like 35, 40 point player. I say reliable, actually. He's a really spotty track record. And with Justin Schultz, it seems to be feast or famine. He goes on these streaks and then he goes quiet. And I think he's someone to try and grab when he's hot and drop when he's cold, rather than someone to put up with all season long. But if we're looking for the outlier, coming into this season, he probably had such a low projection by our patrons because he just had 12 points in 46 games with Pittsburgh for that 21-point pace. And I think that was probably the biggest outlier in all of Schultz's career numbers. So I think recency bias really hurt his projection coming into the season. He really struggled in his last season with Pittsburgh. This season in Washington, Schultz saw some on-ice shooting luck that propelled him to that 48-point pace. But it's not to say he's like without that shooting luck, he still can't be reasonably productive. I think he's probably a 35, 40-point guy with a second power play role, give or take a point or two. I guess I feel like, again, he's not someone that I would be very patient with if he's ever on my roster. I'd be happy to have him, but I'm also not expecting that he's going to go ahead and do another 45, 50 points. He's almost like, he's kind of like these Alex Goligoski or Alec Martinez types who have value for their points, but the difference between them and Justin Schultz is that Schultz offers so little in the way of peripherals that he's really, really boring to have. Whereas those other guys have a nice floor if they're not actually putting up the 35, 40-point pace for a while that you're hoping for.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's really hard to hold a defenseman on your roster. If you're in a league like the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League, where, we give our 0.5 for blocks, 0.25 for hits, 0.5 for shots. So it's just nice to have a defenseman in that spot where even if they don't get a point, they'll still give you 1 or 2, hopefully maybe 2.5, couple points if you're lucky. And then if they give you an assist, it's like a really great night. And Schultz was, maybe he'd give you an assist and a shot and give you like 3.5 points on a good night. But then there's other nights where he's giving you only like 1 point and it's not as exciting. So yeah, I think I'm with you there. 40-point guy. Probably not someone I'm going to draft. Okay, let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum. 2 guys who you're definitely going to draft. 2 guys who I both had on my couple team last year. And I'm so mad, like thinking about it. It's bringing back all my memories of losing to Ben in the semifinals because his team just exploded. My team was great because I got with late picks because of their low projections, both Jacob Chychrun and Alex DeBrincat. These are guys, the patrons projected Chychrun for 38 points going into last season. He ended up putting up 41 points in 56 games, 60-point pace, so many of them goals. Like Chychrun, we all know the amazing year he had, but maybe even his year is eclipsed by Alex DeBrincat's breakout season. The patrons projected him for a paltry 58 points, and DeBrincat instead was above a point per game, 56 points in 52 games. Brian, if you had to pick one of these guys, Chychrun or DeBrincat, who's more likely to continue where they left off when the puck drops on October 13th?
You know me, I'm not just going to give you my answer. I'm going to talk about each player. And as I talk about each player, you're going to find out which one. But you're right in that there is only one of these guys that I'm relying on to be able to repeat their past season. Do you want to guess off the top who I think it is?
Yeah, DeBrincat.
You think, yeah, so you're right. Okay. There goes all the suspense, but here's why.
Oh, let me guess everything. You're going to say Chychrun was great, but you have no faith in Arizona being a team that's going to score a lot of goals. Is that right?
So that's definitely a big part of it. Yeah, it's not a very complicated answer that way, but I still want to give Chychrun his due because he's this rare type of defenseman who consistently shoots with a near 10% conversion rate. He's been up above 8% for 3 years now. And when he's taking 3 shots per game, that can be money from a defenseman. First, to get 3 shots a game and then to have an 8 to 10% conversion rate on those 3 shots. That's fantastic. That said, he shot 10% at 5-on-5 last season. That's still probably a little high. Like for reference, the top defensive shooters for the 3 years combined prior to last season where, get this, Carl Gunnarsson shot 9.7% in St. Louis over the 3 seasons before this one. Then you have Jared Spurgeon and Damon Severson shot just above 8%, then 9 other guys above 7%. So it's pretty hard for a defenseman to shoot above 7% at 5-on-5. I think Chychrun's one of those guys, but I still think he might have picked up an extra, goal or 3 at 5-on-5 with his shooting percentage last season. He also saw a career high points partition. Chychrun also saw a career high points participation rate that's at least 10% above the mark that we'd expect to sustainably see from a defenseman. And himself based on his career track record, and an on-ice shooting percentage at 5-on-5 that was also very high for Chychrun. It's actually like we see such a high on-ice shooting percentage, just like around 11%. We see that for defensemen who play with superstars, but we know how many superstars we can find in the desert this year coming up. And so, Elon, that's where it sort of all ties in. So Chychrun had this really friendly variance that might make sense if he had a better supporting cast. It might make more sense if he had a better supporting cast, but he does not. At the same time, again, Chychrun still had a clear role upgrade last year that had him playing and shooting more than ever before at all strengths. But I'm just saying, like 60 points, too high an expectation. Don't just count on him to have this linear growth from here or even hold, especially, like anyone thinking about Chychrun at 60 points. That's rich considering how many forwards in Arizona we think could even get that many points. But I still think that Chychrun could get 50 if things go well and if the team in front of him is reasonable, like isn't the bottom of the pack offensively. If they are, then I think 50 points would be a real success for him. I guess, Elon, my question back about Chychrun is, what would you put his odds at for being the Coyotes' leading scorer this year?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Like you're talking about how they don't have a lot of players for him to produce with. So what can we really expect him to do? Like I'm looking at their leading scorers from last year. So Phil Kessel was their leading scorer, 43 points in 56 games. He's still there. Chychrun was next. Garland was next. So he's gone. That's obviously a big loss. Garland had 39 points last year in his 49 games. Then you got Keller, who's still there. Schultz is still there. Dvorak is still there. So, a lot of the leading scorers on the team are still there. Plus Dmitry Yaskin is in the picture. He's obviously a guy who brings that big goal scoring pedigree from the KHL. Maybe he replaces Connor Garland somewhat. So I wonder if maybe we're over. I definitely agree with you. Don't get me wrong. I would be very nervous at projecting him as a 60-point guy. I'd be much happier to lock in a 52 to 55 projection. But I think maybe we might be a little bit overrating how different the quality of his teammates will be. But of course, you also bring up all the variants and stuff that maybe was a little friendly to him as well. Anyways, I'm not answering your question at all. Your question was, is he going to lead the team in scoring? I'll say probably not. I don't know. Well,
what odds would you take?
Okay, here's the tricky part about that question. Is Phil Kessel, I think if he gets a lot of points, I think he gets traded. And then does he no longer, does he not count anymore because he was traded and the rest of his points came from another team? So if we're talking about him being the leading scorer on the team of points scored as an Arizona Coyote, I think those are pretty good. I think I go 50-50 on that. But I think that maybe a Kessel or a Dvorak, one of these guys might be able to pace for a bit more, but then do so well that they become attractive trade pieces, which is what Arizona's hoping for.
Right. They're going to strip that team for parts, get prospects back, maybe save a bit of cash so they can move to Tempe and be happily on their way towards the number one pick next season. So we'll see what happens with Arizona this year. It's going to be an uphill climb for Chychrun to get to 50. And I think everyone just needs to be careful because in our mock draft, he was at the top of the board right from the start. If I was looking at defensemen sorted by fantasy points per game using our Cupful scoring, which by the way, cupful.com/rules, if you're curious to see our scoring setup, which values, most setups should value a goal scoring shot taking defenseman. If yours doesn't, maybe tweak it a little. Anyway, he's right at the top. And it's someone you're tempted to take. So, he just broke out last season. Good times are going to continue. And I think the breakout was great, but he's not in a position to sustain it yet, given the cast around him. I hope he's able to pick up where he left off at some point, but I'm not sure it's going to be next year or even the year after that, depending on where he is moving forward. But Alex DeBrincat, yes, go get him. Wherever he is ranked based on last year's rankings, you can count on that happening again. Last season, Alex DeBrincat saw 3 more minutes a night on average. And unlike the year before, DeBrincat was never randomly demoted at 5-on-5 or on the power play. And I am so in it for DeBrincat to just do this all over again. There it is. That's a short answer. But here's the extra little bonus that you get from listening to our show. You, as a fantasy hockey manager and drafter, you want to try and let your competitors know that, DeBrincat, no, you're not going to fall for that. He was really lucky last season. So if you want to scare them off, I wonder if I could phrase this clip in a way that you could just send them, like clip it yourself and send them. Anyway, DeBrincat shot, you could tell your competitors, Alex DeBrincat shot 16% at 5-on-5. That's high amongst forwards. 25% on the power play, which is crazy high for an all situation shooting percentage above 20%. That means more than 1 out of every 5 shots DeBrincat took last season went in, and that ranked him 4th amongst all forwards, all scorers, all skaters in the NHL. So that would normally be crazy. For me, that's a red flag. But what you don't want to tell your competition about Alex DeBrincat is that that's basically all in line with his career numbers. This guy's a high-end converter. DeBrincat had this, giant hiccup in 2019-20 where he shot under 5% at 5-on-5. And I don't know if you remember, there was some guy on some podcast that told you all DeBrincat's getting a raw deal, and he still looks every bit the 40 goal scorer he was the year prior. And look, that bared out to be the case. And just to also put DeBrincat's shooting percentage and conversion rate in context, the only other guy in the NHL who shot last year with the same volume and converted as often as DeBrincat last year was Brad Marchand. And we're not saying Brad Marchand fluked his way to it. I'm not seeing the same from DeBrincat. Other guys who are high volume, high efficiency converters include guys like Leon Draisaitl, Braden Point, Steven Stamkos, Kirill Kaprizov, Mikko Rantanen, Jake Gensel. This is the territory that DeBrincat is rightfully in. So I'm all in on another huge season from Alex DeBrincat. And his age, he's only 24. He's going to be his age 24 season. He already has 2 40-goal seasons under his belt. And that other one in which I swear he still deserved it. If you want one other caveat to throw at your competition, you're like, hey, he doesn't get Pius Suter as a center anymore. But I don't think that'll be a problem because DeBrincat's other huge season came with Dylan Strome. I'm curious to see actually how the Chicago Lions play out. But yeah, Alex DeBrincat, between him and Chychrun, between him and just about anyone who broke out last year, DeBrincat is the one who I think is most likely to meet or exceed his totals from last year.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, except for right at the end when you brought up as the example of the center he's going to play with is Dylan Strome. Like, I'm pretty sure we're looking at Kirby Dach and Jonathan Toews.
Oh, yeah. No, I didn't say he's gonna. I said he did. He did really well with Dylan Strome. He did really well with Pius Suter. I just don't think, there's no need to think he can only do it with this one guy.
Oh, I see. Yeah, if anything, you'd think he's getting an upgrade. Like, no disrespect to Pius Suter, but if he's going to play with Toews next year, or hopefully Kirby Dach is better than Suter sometime soon based on his draft picks. So yeah, all good times coming for Alex DeBrincat. I'm with you. And yeah, Mark Lazarus agreed when we had our beat writer interview. He was like, no, this is the real DeBrincat. He's a superstar. Everyone should realize it. All right, Brian, we've still got 5 more guys I want to bring up to you that the patrons got totally wrong and projected them way too low. So we'll get to them in just a sec. You're listening to Keeping Karlsson. All right. Oh, Brian, I was going to say, you were banging. You got so excited, which I love. I love the energy, but you banged your table a couple times. So if you want to try to, maybe your microphone's better now and it catches the table banging.
More sensitive. Okay. I feel like we're pacing for 2 episodes, by the way.
Yeah, I'm down.
Okay. Like I was just peeking at my notes for the next one. That's it. That's another. It might be like a 40-minute one, but it's an episode.
Okay. All right. And we're back. Brian, let's continue our discussion of players who the patrons were too low on in our patron projection project last year. Next up, Vincent Trochek. That's an interesting, right? The patrons projected him for a very basic 51-point pace season, continuing exactly what he did in 2018-19, 2019-20. It's not a big mystery why we all expected Trochek to be once again a 50-point guy, but the dude exploded out of the gate. He had 34 points in his first 32 games, and then even with a bit of a slow finish, he still ended the season with 43 points in 47 games. That's a 75-point pace, so 25 higher than what people were expecting. Brian, this was just like what Trochek did 3 seasons ago when he had that huge breakout with Florida. And then everyone thought, oh man, look at this guy. Time to draft him like the top 10 of my drafts in my bangers leagues. And then he completely disappointed people for a couple of years. So I'm kind of scared to now tell people again, no, this is the real Trochek. Expect 75 points. So what do you think? Was what he did this past season for real? Or do people need to be very buyer beware because the whole fool me once, shame on me? Like, you know what I'm talking about, right? We've seen this happen before with Trochek.
Very hard to project Vincent Trochek. He kind of lines up he's from the Joe Pavelski school of just try and project me, right? Because his situation keeps changing. His favor with his own coaches seems to change. And yet we're coming off a season where after we're coming off a pattern where he was amazing. Then he seemed like trash, and then he was amazing again.
Okay, let's not say 50-point pace is trash, but comparatively.
Like definitely not worth what you were spending to acquire him in a draft or trade. But one thing to like about Trochek, and thing that he's on the up and up, he was rewarded last year for his work with an extra 90 seconds a night over the season before that. And look at who he was playing with compared to his last season in Florida. He's playing with Martin Necas and Nino Niederreiter, which, okay, you might say, okay, they're good. But like juxtapose that with his Florida line mates, Noah Lachari and Brett Connolly. It's like, yeah, I can see why Trochek had a better season in Carolina this year. He rediscovered his own shooting mojo, had power play production come back for him, which has always been a huge part of his best seasons. Like, he's shown himself that he can be a good 5-on-5 producer, and that power play role is where he really puts his value over the top. His points participation was high for sure. And that's something to expect, that maybe he won't quite reach the heights that Trochek was at last season. And another factor to consider is Teuvo Teravainen being back full time. But when Teravainen was back for about 10 games at the end of last season, Trochek's deployment was virtually unchanged. He held his spot with Necas and Niederreiter. He held his spot on the top power play. But just throwing it out there, it's like the Dallas situation, right? You've got someone who was not in the equation all season, who will be back in the equation this season. So putting all that together, I think rather than 75 points for Trochek, 65 to 70 seems righter to me, but we get all kinds of surprises from Vincent Trochek. So, it could be anywhere between 50 and 80 points, but if I am drafting him, I think I'm looking at him in that 65, 70 point range.
Yeah, okay. I think I see that. The risk with Trochek, I think, is him getting bumped from that power play. The same thing that happened in Florida, right? They got Dadonov or whoever it was that year when he lost the power play. And then all of a sudden, his point production dipped, which of course makes sense because you can get a lot of points with that man advantage. So if you look at Carolina, I think, you've got locked in your Aho, Svechnikov, Niederreiter. No, not Niederreiter. Wait. Aho, Svechnikov, Teravainen, and then it was Trochek last year for a lot of the year, and I guess Teravainen wasn't there, and so Martin Necas got some time. So I think you kind of look at is Martin Necas ready to kind of take that next step and bump Trochek from the top power play? And speaking of Necas, he's another guy who the patrons were too low on, right? The patrons were expecting around a 49-point pace. And that made sense because he only had 49 point pace. And he responded by putting up 41 points in 53 games for a 63-point pace. So Necas was another guy who had a huge breakout, probably because he was playing with Vincent Trochek for a lot of the year. And clearly they both had a lot of success together. So Brian, maybe I'll ask you two questions in one here. First of all, that top power play, how confident are you that Trochek can hold that over Necas? And then part two, Necas, 60-point guy now. He's only 22 years old, and he's just had this breakout season. Should we just rely that now this is a 60-plus point guy moving forward? Maybe there's upside for more, but we could at least set the floor at 60 where he was last year?
That all hinges on the power play situation that you asked about. And I think the important context here is that Trochek was playing net front in Carolina and doing a really great job of it. I don't see, it seems to me that net front guys on the power play hold their spots more consistently than guys on the flanks. Think of Alex Chiasson and Alex Killorn. These are guys who are not high-end producers, but they know how to play that net front on a 1-3-1. And so they just keep racking up those points. And I don't see a Necas for Trochek substitution making a ton of sense when Trochek is playing that role so well. Of course, they have a new power play quarterback coming in Tony DeAngelo, and you wonder what else that changes about the power play. But I would be pretty surprised if Necas usurped Vincent Trochek if they do hold that 1-3-1, which more and more teams are playing. So I don't see why Carolina would back off from it when it was so successful for them last season. So that's why I'm still optimistic about Trochek staying on the top unit, and why there is a ceiling on what I expect from Martin Necas, who had a fantastic season. His 5-on-5 production looked good, and it looked like he was growing as he enters his age 23 season. He did have on the power play from the second unit 94% points participation. I've said that a few times. I'm trying to use points participation as a word to describe what we usually say IPP for, just because points participation makes more sense. For anyone who's not familiar with it, it's of all the goals that were scored while the player was on the ice, how many did this player get a point on And while Martin Necas was on the ice on the power play, he got a point on 94% of the goals scored from essentially the second unit. So he's on a 17 power play point pace from the second unit. Too high. Like that's not going to happen very often. It's a fluky thing. The best second unit producers, the guys who stay there all season long, 12 points, maybe 14, 17 is a bit high, but Necas's role is going to keep growing on the team, right? I just mentioned he's 23 years old. He's young. Carolina, especially with what their budget appears to be, are going to want to get the most out of him during their window to contend. I'm bought in on Necas being a legit NHL player, a legit contributor, scorer in real life and in fantasy, but just that lack of a top power play role puts a pretty firm ceiling on Necas's numbers. So I think 60 points is probably safe for Necas, but unfortunately, to me, it's also more or less that ceiling unless his power play role changes.
Yeah, and I don't know, Brian. I think I might just, it's so hard to predict, but I might disagree. Just like, I feel like I'm more 50-50 on who's getting that top power play spot. Like, we've been here. Like, Trochek was great on the power play in 2018-19 when he had that huge season with the Panthers. Next season, he was off the top power play. So it's not as if it's unknown for Trochek to lose that spot. And you're talking about like net front and all that. Like, Necas is bigger, right? Trochek is only 5'10". Necas is 6'2". You'd think, like, usually teams put the bigger guy. So obviously we can't predict what RBD is, or that's not RBD. Rod Brindamore. RBDA. What's that acronym that people use for Rod Brindamore?
I think it's RBA.
RBA. Okay. Well, yeah. Well, I don't know what he's going to do. I don't even know how to say his acronym, but I feel like Necas is someone that if I had to bet, maybe I wonder if you could get odds on this. I would take Necas maybe above Trochek next year. Go for it.
Do you care if like Necas, I'll just say Necas didn't play in net front on the second unit. Do you think they'll just like say, hey, you're going to move from the flanks to the net front position?
I don't know. Are you saying this like you're saying it so quietly now? Like I don't know if you're saying this meant to be on the show or like off the air.
No, it's meant to be on air. I'm not hiding from the fact that Necas like not only would be getting a promotion to another power play unit and taking away a guy who was really productive there, but changing his role on it. It just seems unlikely to me. We've seen like Elon. To me, this is reminiscent of Timo Meier in San Jose, who just could not get on that top unit, no matter how good a player, how well-rounded he seemed to be, and how much he could do it 5-on-5. There just wasn't space for him. And I think Nick Ehlers is another example. I see the same thing. It's not new. Like we've seen this play out before. It happens. And I think Necas is the next victim.
I guess we'll see. I think it's too early in his career to just like say that's for sure happening to him, but
I'm not saying forever. I'm saying this next year.
Yeah, so I can't wait. Okay. Let's put a pin in this. Come back. I think Trochek and Necas, we like them both. They both, it's going to be dependent on this power play. Like we said, that's going to be an extra 20 to 25 points potentially. I mean, they're not going to get nothing on PP2, but you know what I'm saying. All right, let's go next to a guy definitely on the other end of his career as Necas and I guess Trochek. So we're going now back to players in their 30s, like your Pavelskis. I'm talking about Matt Zuccarello, who had that dull 47-point pace in his first season with Minnesota. And then going into his age 33 season, it made sense for the patrons to peg him as like a 45-point guy, not worth drafting in most leagues. Then he was like injured to start the year, but we were all wrong, right? Like Zuccarello missed the start of the year, but came out shooting out of the gate, became shooting out of the gate when he started mid-February. He had 11 points in his first 7 games, got right on the top line playing with Kaprizov. Zook ended with 35 points in 42 games. It's a 68-point pace. Of course, like you said about Marco Rossi, like it's a little concerning that Kaprizov isn't signed yet and all these stories about like, is he potentially going to go back to the KHL? So whatever, but LeBron, let's just assume that Kaprizov is back. I would assume that Zook is going to at least start the season on the other wing on his top line again, since they played so well last year. So do you think he can keep up that 68-point pace again?
No, I don't. And I was a very, very, very happy Matt Zuccarello manager last year. I was really happy to have him on my roster when he came back from injury and came on the scene and had that wild, no pun intended. He had a 100% points participation rate through his first 16 points of the season, which is crazy to think he was in either as goal scorer or assist on every single goal that happened while we was on the ice. And we talked about that on the show as being like, hey, this isn't sustainable. And I dangled him in a lot of trades. And sure enough, when that unsustainable points participation rate tapered off less than 20 games into his season. He gathered Zuccarello just 15 points in his final 25 games. That's a 50-point pace. And that's only thanks to a flurry of activity in like the last week or two of the season that we saw from Zuccarello, where he again just bumped up his game and produced unsustainably. I could see Zuccarello. I still like him as a player. I could see him landing between 50 and 60 points. I think a lot of it depends on if Minnesota has a decent center to put between him and assuming Kaprizov again. I think anyone playing with Kaprizov could be eligible to get a boatload of points, and Zuccarello has proven himself to be more than competent. I just don't see a ton of upside here, though, and he doesn't do much else on the score sheet when the points aren't coming. So I don't plan to draft Zuccarello. I think of him as someone closer to 50 than 60. And like he's almost like a forward version of Justin Schultz, although I think better producing in general. But he's someone who could be really streaky and could give you some really great runs and win you a week or two or three. But he might also lose you some if you hold on to him during those cold days.
Yeah, like he used to be so great when he was on the Rangers. Then he had that like quick run in Dallas where he like, I think it was like 2 games. I don't know. I remember it was very short, but it looked really good. And now in Minnesota it was a slow start. Then he's like looking good again last year. So it makes me like interested in this guy, thinking he could get back to being this high offensive producer. Maybe just took him some time to adjust. But of course, you bring up a good point that he's been a little bit streaky and he doesn't have the greatest peripherals. He's actually sitting in free agency in my Dynasty League. Anytime I click on the players button on Fantrax and I get, the players ranked by their points from last year, he's right at the top there. But it's a cap league. He's getting paid $6 million a year. For 3 more years, it's really tough to like buy in on this guy at that cap hit. But if he's going to be top line, top power play with Kaprizov and, power play with Fiala, it's a good spot, but obviously no guarantee that he holds it.
In a cap league, definitely, like you should probably leave him behind. That makes sense. I don't know who you would need to drop, Elon, to make both roster space and cap space for Zuccarello, but I don't imagine it would be worth it. And again, he could be really valuable several times throughout the fantasy season. We were talking about it at the front of the episode about how you want to use your last picks on someone with upside when you're picking your bench spots. I don't think Zuccarello is going to fit in most people's like active spots on a busy night. And he's not that exciting a player to have on your bench.
Oh, I thought you were going to go the opposite. I feel like he's a high upside guy because of that run he went on at the start of last year. It was amazing. If he's on the top line and top power play.
But it was totally unsustainable. Like, of course, it was a great run, but it was 15 games. And that like I said, you might get that again. But I don't think I'm looking for a guy not who's going to be hot for 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 times during the season. I'm looking for a guy who's going to be a consistent producer, surprisingly, all through the year. And Zuccarello could fit that bill, but I think he's one of the less exciting options. Like I'd rather take a flyer on, I think I'd rather Marco Rossi.
Okay.
As someone I plan to stream.
I'll take Zuc over Rossi. What about Zuccarello over Lafreniere? Who would you take there? Last pick of the draft. I
think I would take Lafreniere. I would take the bigger swing, especially if it's the last pick and everyone else has passed on Zuccarello and I can just grab him from free agency. That's what I assume. I just assume he's going to, even if he puts up points in his first 3 games, he could still sit in free agency because I think people have gotten used to not expecting a lot from him.
I don't know, Brian. He wasn't in free agency for most of last year in Cupful. I don't see why all of a sudden he's going to start the year in free agency. I think
maybe I'm reading it wrong.
Most leagues, I think people are going by last year's stats. I'll be very surprised if Zuccarello is going undrafted. I guess we'll have to get those Yahoo ADPs when they come out and we can find out how people are viewing this guy.
Okay. So just to get your overall take, because I think we're reading his availability more, but if we're looking at projecting him, are you taking the over or under on say 55 points?
Right around there. That sounds about right. Give me 50. Give me 56. I'll take over, but it's close. Yeah.
I've got the under, but I guess that's the difference between us on him.
That's the difference. It's a 2-point difference, but it means everything. Okay. Next up, let's go to Colorado and we'll talk about Sam Girard, a player who we knew to be a valuable part of the Avs, but the patrons weren't expecting too much on the offensive side of things after he had never broken like 30 points in a season in the first 3 years of his career. And then the patrons gave him like a healthy 38-point projection, which I think was like not disrespectful, but it's like, a non-top power play guy. What are you really going to expect from a Girard? But Girard spat on that like 40-ish point guy label and put up a breakout campaign, 27 points in 48 games. It's a 55-point pace. Those are Justin Schultz numbers, Brian. Interestingly, if you look at the season splits, the majority of those points came in the first half of the year. He was nearly a point per game guy halfway through. Then he ended the season on a massive cold streak, only 2 assists in his final 12 games, which was, by the way, broken up by a 6-game absence with a lower body injury right at the end of the season. So who knows if maybe you could just blame that like cold stretch at the end on this injury. So, Brian, what are we going to do? Are we writing off the poor ending due to the injury and actually considering him around a 50-55 point guy next year? Or do you think the highs and lows wash out and he's like somewhat sustainable at around 45-50? Or are we going all the way back to like closer to 40 like we were projecting last year? I think this is a really hard guy to project for next year, since it's pretty rare for a non-top power play defenseman to hit around 50 points or higher.
And Girard is one of these guys in the NHL who could be a power play quarterback on 30 other NHL teams, maybe like 25 if we're being realistic, but he's never going to be in Colorado because of Cale Makar. And even Bowen Byram could have more upside quarterbacking a power play, but that's okay for Girard because his 5-on-5 play is solid. He's got a great exit from the zone, can make a great first pass. But the reason, Elon, that Girard did so well last season, do you remember that there were 11 games when Cale Makar was out of the lineup?
So what, did he get like a ton of power play points during that time?
He got a few. They weren't all power play points, but Girard had 10 points in 11 games while Cale Makar was out of the lineup. And I think that's about it. That's the difference between what we would have expected and what he actually delivered. Like, we know Girard is this legit talented player, but we also know he's going to rarely have a role that allows him to put up more than 45 points, and 45 might even be generous. I think I'm only at 45 because all of Colorado is so high octane and so dangerous that you can collect points pretty well, especially if you're great at getting that offense going and is great at doing that as Sam Girard is. I think he may have taken a step forward at 5-on-5 last year and had his best season at 5-on-5 yet. And he enjoyed a better rate of scoring chances per 60 than he'd ever seen before, cashed in with some of his highest secondary assist rates that helped him up there. But he really, I think he overperformed while Cale Makar was out of the lineup. And Girard also overperformed, period, on the power play. I mean, I was just talking about Nechas's unsustainable power play production, but I think Girard is in a similar camp. He paced for 15 power play points from the second unit in Colorado, and that will be hard to repeat, especially as a defenseman. I'd expect maybe 10 or 11. So all those reasons to say I would love to have another fantasy relevant defenseman in Colorado, but my answer is the same as it was in season, which is that Girard is probably more of a 40-45 point guy, which is nothing to sneeze at, but you can't expect the 55 point pace to repeat that he put up this past year.
Yeah, if you're saying he had 10 points in those 11 games, want to say put it down to like 5 points that you would have expected him to get in those 11 games if Makar was in the lineup, all of a sudden you're down to a 46 point pace. So maybe that makes sense. Definitely still better than the 38 Patriots projected him for before, but maybe not worth drafting unless he falls too far. If people are just like, oh, whatever, no chance he could do it. He's clearly a guy who's going to be on the ice a lot, and Colorado's going to score a lot of goals. So obviously it depends how deep your league is. He's definitely not someone to ignore, but I think we're on the same page, Brian, around 45 points. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I think he's probably closer to the Patrons' projection going into last year of 38 than of his actual output at 55. And I will also throw out there, like, another thing that makes him really difficult to draft, even if he is around a 40-point guy, he's super boring. He doesn't do anything. 79 shots in 48 games. Like, you're lucky if he averages a shot and a half per night. He doesn't hit. He doesn't block shots. He plays a ton of minutes. That's it.
Yeah, if your league counts TOI, maybe he's helping you there.
Yeah.
All right, so let's end, Brian, on a player that the Patrons disrespected last year, and so far they're disrespecting again this year. We've been every day doing a rankings with the patrons on our Discord server for the last 75 days, just picking players that we're ranking one at a time. McDavid went first, then everyone votes, and then whoever had the most votes goes second, blah, 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 blah. We're on vote 75, and we keep track even of players who have votes but haven't gotten the majority yet, so that going into the next day, we can see everyone who has votes from at least someone. David Perron, still no vote, and we're on vote 75. This is a guy who last year had 58 points in 56 games, over a point per game pace for David Perron. Clearly, the patrons don't believe that he's going to be able to do it again. I mean, and I'm also to blame. You're also to blame. We haven't voted for this guy. Last year, we projected him for 61. He made us look dumb. And it seems like, according to this ranking, everyone would just probably do that again. Brian, what do you think is going on with Perron? Like, that season last year was a career high. Like I said, like we're talking like an 88 point pace. Do you think that something changed and we're just all being dumb for some reason? Like Tom in our Discord server, Hopplenuts is his nickname. He gave a fun rant saying how he knows what's going to happen. He's going to disrespect Perron. Someone else is going to take him, and then Perron is going to defeat him in fantasy to pay him back. Is that what we're all just destined to do? To just never give Perron the respect he deserves, just for him to go and put up a point per game season?
Ignore David Perron at your own risk. He's for real. He's legitimate. And you asked if something changed last year. Yeah. And it's changed like slowly over the past 2 years. David Perron has this new role as a triggerman, especially on the power play, and he's crushing it. And it actually reminds me of Max Pacioretty a little bit, who we've mentioned over and over on the podcast since after his first year in Vegas. He's reinvented the hockey he plays and is seeing crazy good numbers because of it. And like, remember, like David Perron had a really strong period of his career where he was a super reliable goal scorer and sort of, drifted downwards and got lost in the middle and is now back on the up and up now that he is playing a bit of a different role. And a lot of that revolves around taking shots. And this is a very similar trajectory to what we're seeing from David Perron. And I think his coaches agree that like this is working for David Perron. He's at a career high 5-on-5 time on ice last season, continued to see that career high power play usage carrying over from the season prior. He's paced for 31 power play points over 82 games. And I think it's for real. Perron paced for 27 power play points the year before. And I don't see any reason to doubt that Perron is going to just go ahead and do that again this season, even though he's another year older. He seems to have found this new element to his game that he can really work to his advantage, and his team knows it. This power play production for Perron is the difference because he's had similar production at 5-on-5 for 5 years. Can you hear that?
Yeah, but it's charming.
Okay.
He's had similar production
at 5-on-5 for 5 years now, but within that 5-year span, he got this look on the power play in Vegas and he hasn't turned back. That's turned him into these 45-point seasons that were the sort of down mucky bit of his career into 65+ point seasons. And now, of course, he's upped his game even further with that huge, what did he pace for Elon last year? 58 points in 56 games, over a point per game. So yeah, it's really impressive. There are some high markers of variance, like his points participation is very high, but it's also consistent. I really believe it's a function of the role that he's begun playing. He gets tons of shot attempts and from super dangerous areas where he's been successful at scoring from. And he's good at creating when he's not the one in on the goal. He's good at I think he might be, I'm not going to say like Ovechkin, but he's drawing attention. And if everybody's like, oh yeah, David Perron's just going to crush it from the side there and beat us, well, that leaves someone else open when they go over and chase him. So he can shoot, he can create. I think David Perron is the most underrated power play weapon in the league, possibly the most underrated fantasy player in the league. And I don't see why he wouldn't be at least a 70-point guy next year.
Okay, yeah, well, I don't know if now you've messed with the fabric of the universe because now you're saying you expect him to do really well. So now this will be the year when he finally falls off. I
bit my tongue because it's so cliche at the end of that to say, and that's why he's going to only pace for 50 points this season and struggle mightily. Of course, right? We're getting used to it. We see the pattern, and now it's time for the trend to break again. Except I feel very confident about I didn't add that little couch because I really feel confident. He knows what he's doing. His team knows what they're doing with him. Everybody's happy and they can just keep rolling.
Yeah. Okay. So you've heard it here first. Maybe you should. I know Hopplenuts. Tom's not drafting Perron, but it sounds like you should. So take that advice. As we end this really fun episode of Keeping Karlsson, we've gone through a whole bunch of players that the patrons projected way too low. Next up, and Brian, you and I are going to record this right now, but the listeners just wait a couple days. We're going to next talk about players who we were way too high on and they totally disappointed us. It's going to be a totally different vibe. We really hope you'll stay with us. Make sure you're subscribed to Keeping Karlsson to get that and all the great preseason episodes that we're going to be throwing at you over the next month and a bit. So just subscribe at Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I don't need to tell you. You know how to listen to a podcast. You listen to this somehow, right? So please subscribe. We'd appreciate it. And while you're at it, if you're liking our show and you want to maybe support us, help us to put out more great shows, we have a Patreon where we try to give as much as we can to our supporters. including our monthly patron cast. You could get the one we just recorded last week, which was a ton of fun. We have our Discord server where, it's really heating up, and we've had a lot of great help from Jeremy and Kevin to really take this Discord server to the next level and make it a really fun place to be. And of course, like Brian said at the top of the show, the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League. That's a perk of being a patron, is you get to play in our awesome league. We really think it's going to be an awesome year. And again, check out kkupful.com, kkupfl.com to get all the information about our league. But with that, Brian, I think we're good to cue that outro music. Why don't you go ahead and read us the credits?
All right. Actually, right at the top of the credits, I'm going to mention when I was talking about Natchez and Trochek and where they shot from on the power play, that's from hockeyviz.com. We subscribe, we support hockeyviz.com, but that's available for free. If you want to go check it out, and then you should support it if you love it, obviously, the way we hope you'll support us. But there you go. That's one way I use HockeyViz, which I do cite in our credits every episode that I will begin now. This episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast was presented by Dobber Hockey and powered by our patrons, including our newest super supporters. Thanks so much, Tom, Derek, Rob, and Patty. Patty's like the original super supporter. I think she was our very first patron.
She was, yeah. Patty's been with us all along the way. Patty, you're the best.
Patty's a rock for
But Robin and Derek and Tom also so awesome.
They're also great.
By the way, so this super supporter thing, we just is a name we're giving to the people who are giving us like $10 a month, which we really appreciate. There actually are other people on our Patreon that are giving us $10 a month, but they're not marked as super supporters. So if you're one of these people, you have to go on Patreon and change your role, I think it's called, or change your tier. If you're not sure what to do, just DM me. I'll tell you what to do.
Okay. Thanks also to some members of we're really getting ready for the new fantasy season. And there's some people in our community, we love our Discord server and everyone we've met through the show who are part of our patron community. And some have really been putting in some time with us and for us and chatting about ideas and ways to make this the best year of Keeping Karlsson and our Discord server and the couple ever. So a shout out again to Kevin Hebert, Jeremy Versillo, John Newhold, Julien Paquette, John Reed. Thank you all for your help. And if you're listening to this on your Patreon and you want to we invite everybody's involvement, whatever you want to do, and we'll be happy. If we missed you, I've been working so hard, let me know. We'll make up for it. Logo art by BrandonWeeb.com, another patron. Outro music by Pat Roach. This episode was researched with help from Dobber Hockey, Frozen Pool, Dobber Prospects, Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Hockey, Cap Friendly, HockeyGoalies.org, Hockey Reference, Hockey Viz, Hockey Database, Elite Prospects, and NBC Sports Edge. I
wonder if people are really tired of our outro music, because I'm probably looping this for 2 minutes for this long outro. But whatever. Hope you're na 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 na. Now it's gonna sound weird because I'm singing it while it's going. So let's just end the show. Great job, Brian. Looking forward to talking to you next about the players that the patrons were too high on.
Until then, do all you can to make sure that fantasy hockey is for everyone.
Boom. All right, let's go. Ready for the next show?
No, David, don't go. You can stay. We're doing it again. It's not over. It's over. Is that the Just for Laughs? Oh no.
No, that's from Homestar Runner.
I didn't watch that video yet. That you
Girl Squad. Oh, it's so great. Such a nice.
I'm still gonna watch it.
There's so many things that Homestar Runner did that were revolutionary and cool that I didn't even realize at the time. When you watch this video and it's wow, they did some amazing things. It's great.
Do we need to start a new recording?
Let's just go.
Okay.
Let's just go.
I thought you were doing I don't know if you ever watched Just for Laughs gags.
No, I hate that shit.
Oh man, it's so.
I don't like pranks. That's not good humor to me.
I don't like prank shows generally too, but this one, it's
whatever. I know you like.
It raises the vibe. No, I don't like that stuff.
You do. You sometimes are talking about some tweet you saw where someone fell over, and you're like, I've been watching this all day. I can't stop. You love that. Stuff.
What?
I don't know. I feel like just recently you posted on Discord or something, or I don't know. You shared something about some stupid thing that I didn't think was funny, and then you thought it was so funny.
Okay. All right. Whatever. What was I saying? Oh,
that
yeah.
Just for laughs.
At the end, there's it doesn't matter. You don't know it, and you mocked it, so forget it. I'm sorry I brought it up. Just for Laughs gags is the perfect it's always on when it's been a while since I was on a plane, but it's always available on airplane. That's the only context that I really watch it in.
I was
perfect.
There.
Perfect plane watching.
Your true colors
come out.
I hope people are aware. This is our dynamic, even though maybe Brian would be he doesn't want this to be our dynamic, but I like joshing with my buds.
I like well, I won't say the word I want to use.
Okay, well, let's
I
go.
like
Let's do the
taking
show.
a dump on your interests.
It's like just because it's not for me doesn't mean it's bad for everybody. That's what makes the world a beautiful place.
Shams and fantasy tidbits. Blanking on well, that's your name on YouTube, so that's the name I'll use. Both back me up that Just for Laughs Gags is good. I'm gonna make another TV show recommendation.
All right.
That I've made to you already, but I know you didn't watch it and you disregarded.
I'm ready.
It's called Nirvana, the band, the show.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna love it.
Okay, so what is it on Netflix?
No, it's on CBC Gem, believe it or not.
I don't have that.
It's free.
Like
it's CBC's streaming app.
Oh, okay. All right.
Nirvana with 2 N's, like the set, like N, like the second set of N's is.
I'm not writing it down now, but can you message me about it later? I've
messaged you already. You once upon a time, I told you before anyone was watching it, I told you to watch Schitt's Creek, and you never did.
I watched it in the end.
I know in the end, but you could have been ahead of the crowd with me.
I know. I blew it. All right.
And Just for Laughs Gags is just another in a long line of TV recommendations you don't take.
I mean, I've seen it. It was on the air forever. Is it still on?
What, Just for Laughs Gags?
Yeah, they
probably still
make
new ones.
All right.
Probably. They're so cheap to make.
It's so like they do that.
They're
thing,
ludicrous. They're so funny.
And then the person comes out of the garbage can. The person's like, "Whoa! Oh no!"
I mean, like you just think a prank show has a ceiling of how good it could be. Actually, prank shows are like tacos.
Uh-huh.
I feel there's a ceiling. Like I had a friend, like who's coming and who's gonna come by. We were gonna hang out, and I was like, "Hey, what do you want to like? Let's go out to eat. What do you want?" And she said tacos, and I was like, okay, fine." Like, and I have low expectations. Like tacos are like good or they're not. But if they're good, they're only a certain level of good. Anyway, I had a taco that blew my mind.
I disagree with that take a lot, but okay.
Really?
I mean, yeah, there's some amazing tacos I've had. There's some places Gina and I go and we want to have good tacos, and they're awesome. Capuchano in Toronto.
Okay,
Mwah. Get that.
Well,
fish
so maybe
taco.
that's it. Maybe you have more access to better tacos than I do, which wouldn't be surprising. Toronto versus Ottawa, but all the tacos I've had, like a good one is good, but it's like there's a ceiling. It can only be so good. But I had a taco that visit. I'll take you. Well, I had one finally that broke the mold for anyone in Ottawa. Yako Taco, delicious little truck, little taco truck. All right. So Yako Taco and Just for Laughs Gags breaking the ceiling of what you can expect from conventional foods and TV show formats.
I mean, yeah, tacos are like maybe it's just a whole different vibe here. Like people definitely, there's a lot of like taco culture in Toronto. I think I definitely never heard this take that like tacos are foods that you're not expecting much from. I think people are very much like, let's go for tacos.
I should have clarified tacos in Ottawa. Right. I believe that there are tacos like further south, like in like Mexico and California, that are really, really amazing.
Yeah, I remember being in San Francisco once, and Dean and I were just going to taquerias every single day.
Yeah,
so many good ones.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to go right now. Stupid COVID.
Adam,
stupid podcast. I can't even go. I have to record an episode right now. Can't go to San Francisco.
Ottoman loves tacos and CBC programming. Surprise, surprise.
All right. Well, he doesn't love tacos. Only now, finally, Yako Taco.
That's
not
true.
A paid advertisement.
Not a paid advertisement.
Okay. That's my joke. Hosted by two guys who are who are no longer, who've learned to no longer get our hopes up about anything. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by two guys who have learned to no longer get our hopes up about anything. I'm your hopes. Oh, I said I'm your hopes. I'm your host. I'm your host, Dylan Dubrowski. With me to break down a bunch of players that we thought would be good last year, then they totally stank. Brian Com.
It's hard to come in when you lead into my name with totally stank. I feel like that could be edited against me, but I'm still very happy to be here. Hello, Elon. Hello, everybody. To err is human, and our patrons are all human. We're going to put the mistake on them. I own it too. There's a lot of guys that we got wrong going into last season and their fantasy output. And we just spent an episode talking about all the guys who outperformed their projections. Now we're going to talk about the guys who are big fat disappointments. Well, big lean disappointments. They're all in great shape, but we'll have to get into the nitty gritty about why exactly we and our patrons were wrong about them.
Yeah, people sometimes like to make fun of Phil Kessel and the shape he's in. Guess what? Phil Kessel, he outperformed his projection. He was great. So all these players in good shape, maybe it's not even that amazing to be like that because Kyler Yamamoto, I don't know what he's benching, but he definitely wasn't putting up points last year. So we'll get to him and a bunch of other guys in just a sec. And maybe some of them will actually be really good sleepers for next year. Players who maybe didn't meet their projections for some reason that we can excuse. And then other people are going to be down on them going into next year. And that's your chance to get a late draft pick that potentially has potential to have the points that we expected them to have going into this year.
Right. And of course, everything we talk about the show today should be going into your draft notebook that you're going to reference as you're drafting your team. And by the way, if you're not drafting a cupful team yet this season, the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League, you should come join us. Come play. We're nice. We have fun. It's our 7th season running the cupful, and it's going to be our best season yet. If you're not familiar with it, the cupful is for everyone. Everybody can play regardless of your skill level. Our leagues are safe and moderated. You can find your own skill level. We have tiers for new, casual, competitive players. Elon and I, as commissioners, make sure they're active managers in every single cupful division. So your league isn't ruined by inactive teams in critical weeks. We do all the best we can to keep things fair and fun. And we have this bumping Discord community where you have this special dedicated chat room for just your division to talk to other managers and to talk a cupful with the other 300 plus managers we expect to have in this year's 7th season of the cupful. So if you haven't started climbing the cupful pyramid all the way up to tier 1, if that's your goal to be the ultimate fantasy hockey champion, you need to join the biggest and best fantasy league in the world. And I say that humbly, but also we're pretty proud of it. So if you want to know more, cupful.com, KKUPFL.com. We'll tell you more. I'll put in the show notes too.
Yeah, or even just message us. We'll tell you all about it. Brian's always happy to talk about Cupful. So yeah, but cupful.com, great site. John Newhold and Jeremy and all these people, Kevin have really helped us all helped us put it together. So yeah, check it out. Also check out dobberhockey.com, which is the site that we're presented by because it's the place to go for all your fantasy hockey news and notes. One thing I like about Dobber Hockey is they have these ramblings every day, which are amazing, just breaking down the recent fantasy news. And then once a week, you get your 21 fantasy rambles if you even don't have time to read the ramblings every day. The most recent one by Ian Gooding, really fun, or whatever. The most recent one broke down 21 of the most interesting things from the past week. So you get your news and notes if you want a lot. If you want a little, it's all there for you. Dobberhockey.com, great site. But Brian, let's get into this and talk about all of these players that I have this spreadsheet where I took all of the projections from last year with the Patron Projection Project, and then I sorted it by how different the projections were to what actually happened. I looked at the percent difference. The first 8 guys on this list here, Brian, are players that I don't even want to talk to you about. They did so badly that I'm pretty sure they all have no fantasy relevance and it's not worth our podcast time. So I'm just going to run down some of the worst projections and you let me know at the end of this list if there's anyone you even want to mention. But it starts with the worst player in terms of competing versus his projection was Alex Edler, who the patrons projected for a healthy 39 points. He ended up with no goals and 8 assists. 8 points in 52 games. So that was obviously a huge bust. Edler is now going to... Where is he going? I don't even remember.
LA?
Oh, yeah.
Do I have it? Double check that.
Right. No, that's right. Okay. That's right. Edler's now going to Los Angeles, and we'll see if he'll be able to score a goal for the Kings. Kyle Turris, the patrons projected for 42 points. We thought maybe he'd be in the top 6 on the Oilers. Ended up only playing 27 games, 5 points. So forget about him. Eric Stahl, he was going to Buffalo. We thought he'd be the line 2 center. Remember how we were all like, wow, why would Minnesota trade Eric Stahl for Marcus Johansson? What a terrible... And both of them are fantasy irrelevant. They were both UFAs. I think Johansson is signed somewhere. Stahl's still a UFA. So forget about that guy. Patrons projected him for 54 points last year. On average, he only had 13. Andreas Johnson on New Jersey was projected for 47. We thought he'd be a top 6 guy on the Devils, get a similar role to, opportunities he's had in Toronto. Total bust, 11 points in 50 games, now likely pushed out of the top 6, especially with Thomas Tatar in the picture. Zach Kassian, need I say more? We were, he didn't end up playing with McDavid. That was the reason why people had a high projection for him. Jeff Skinner, I don't even know. We only projected him for 39 points. We were still way off. He couldn't even match that. Okay. Nikita Gusev, we projected 60 points for him. Remember, like in 2019-20, Gusev started slow and had a really strong finish with New Jersey. We thought he'd be able to keep it up. No, he stunk. 10 points in 31 games overall. He ended the year with Florida. He's a UFA right now. We'll see if he's still in the league. Oscar Lindblom, he's actually somewhat interesting, right? We projected him for 50. He obviously missed a lot of the previous season with cancer, and this year he played 50 games and had only 14 points. I did talk to Charlie O'Connor about Philly, and he did mention Lindblom as a potential dark horse for next season now that, he's maybe had a full summer to train normally. So he's somewhat interesting, but probably not worth drafting in your leagues. So Brian, of that list, is there anyone that you think is worth talking about in terms of preparing for next season?
I think there's at least a theme here that's worth addressing, and it's one we've talked about on the show and on our last Patreon cast. That was just this past Wednesday. It's like an AMA for patrons. I'm done promoting stuff, but there it is. Patreon.com/KeepItKarlsson. Okay, sorry. There's a theme here amongst all these guys. Kyle Turris, Eric Stahl, Andreas Johnson, all on new teams. And what we've said is beware players who are changing teams, right? You gotta take into account that things are never going to go as well as you hope, or not always going to go as well as you hope. Sure, there's sometimes a great match between player and team. For example, I think Tatar and New Jersey will be a great match this year, but I've learned from the past to not get too far ahead of myself. We saw Kyle Turris being someone who could play a solid third line center role in Edmonton, fell out of favor very quickly there. Eric Stahl, same thing in Buffalo. I mean, everyone stunk on Buffalo, but things didn't go well for him there. Andreas Johnson moved from Toronto to New Jersey. Also a really tough go with his new team. So I think that's one lesson that's really underlined here, is that anybody who is changing teams, you got to just put a little flag next to their name on draft day. And if you're comparing them against someone who's pretty similar and you're starting to get stars in your eyes thinking that everything's going to align when this player gets their new team, it might be just as likely that's all going to come crashing down. So beware of anybody changing teams. There's three great reasons right there for why that, or there's three great examples right there of cases where that's happened. The others, I mean, Alex Edler in Vancouver, the season was a mess for COVID. Zach Kassian in Edmonton got bumped pretty soon. So I think the lesson there is you never want to rely too hard. This is something we've been saying for years on those third wheel complementary players that are only doing what they're doing because of deployment. Even Zach Kassian, but Edmonton Lutz up there, couldn't hold on to his spots. So you always have to be a little more careful drafting those guys. Jeff Skinner, I don't think we made him he was projected 39 points, which is not fantasy relevant. I don't know what to say about him. Maybe this year he'll get 39 points.
Okay, enough.
No, 39 points? Is that too high?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
All right. And then Gusev, well, he seemed to fall out of favor in New Jersey. And remember when he was traded to Florida, everyone rushed for him as a free agent. It's different in season, of course, but that went kaboom in a bad way. And Oscar Lindblom was someone who was coming back from a long layoff. So, you can see reasons from each of these players. Like, yeah, there's a contextual factor here that some players can overcome, but maybe it's just, hindsight's 2020. But it seems like there is a lesson we've espoused in the past that applies to all these guys who missed their mark the most.
Yeah. So Brian, you're saying that you've learned this lesson, like Andreas Johnson went to New Jersey, didn't perform. Going into this season, I feel like you've been pretty high on Thomas Tatar and Dougie Hamilton and expecting them to be able to continue what they did going to New Jersey. Do you need to reassess? I acknowledge that. I said, I think Tatar is a great fit for New Jersey, but in the mock drafts we're doing with other patrons, I am giving Tatar that penalty in the draft. I'm holding back and he is falling, so I can still grab him a few rounds later than I think where he should land. But I think I am showing some restraint and saying, I think he can be this good, but I'm going to draft him as if he's this good. And no one else seems to be biting too early on him either. Yeah, I'm looking at our mock draft we've been doing, and Dougie Hamilton went as the second. Is this true? The second defenseman? When did Makar go? Okay, sorry about this, everybody. Okay, no, Makar went first, then John Karlsson. You took John Karlsson above Dougie Hamilton, Brian, I see. And then Hamilton went as the third defenseman off the board. Yeah,
for that reason, because he was changing teams.
Yeah, I think I might drop him a little bit more. Maybe I'd take like a Hedman over Dougie Hamilton. Like I'm not gonna drop him too much, but maybe like you could rely on Victor Hedman to give you your 60 points. Dougie Hamilton, we expect him to be able to do that, but yeah, who knows if things don't fit so well on New Jersey like they have in Carolina. So okay, with that, let's get to some players who I think will be fantasy relevant in just a sec.
Oh yeah, I
I
was gonna say I drafted Tatar in the 13th round in another, and just to give a sense of the guys who went just before him, skaters anyway, Cole Caulfield, Yusuf Alamaki, Patrick Hornqvist, and right after him, Jared McCann, Andrew Mangiapane, Gallagher, Arvidsson, which I thought was a good pick by you, Elon. There's another compliment for one of your picks. Hey. So yeah, if Tatar was still out there, would you have preferred, because Arvidsson's also changing teams, would you have preferred Tatar or Arvidsson?
I think Arvidsson, actually. Tatar, I'm not as high on. Like, the fact that he's getting benched in Montreal, like in playoff games, makes me a little bit concerned that it's not so easy for him to earn the coach's favor. I think that Arvidsson is going to have a nice fit there in LA. And I know you say it'll be a nice fit in New Jersey, but I guess Arvidsson just seems to me as like a safer guy. And also Arvidsson has the potential to score a lot more goals. I think Tatar is more of a disher and a couple, to get more points for goals. So we'll see. That'll be a fun one to check in on at the end of the year. I'm hoping Arvidsson does well. I've got him in my dynasty league, and I'll be honest, I was very happy when I saw him get traded. I don't know if LA was the perfect destination for him for fantasy upside, but definitely better than Nashville. But okay, so Brian, let's get to our list of players who I think might still have fantasy relevance next year, even though we were so wrong with our projections. And like I said at the top, Kyler Yamamoto is the number one guy here. Huge disparity between what we were expecting and what he gave us. So of course he had that insane run at the end of 2019-20, leading the patrons to project him for a 65-point pace. And hey, they had a good reason to, because they expected him to play with Leon Draisaitl, and he did, but still somehow only managed 21 points in 52 games. That's a 33-point pace for the 22-year-old Yamamoto. I don't even know how that's possible when Draisaitl's getting like pacing for 100 points and meet or plus, and then his line mate can't pace for more than 33. He hasn't been picked yet in our slow draft as of round 16, which was earlier this morning. I wonder if he's gone since then. I'll check while you're talking. But yeah, I curious to know if he's even someone that you consider drafting in your drafts, or from what we saw last season, like even if he gets this second line deployment, are we even expecting him to be very relevant at all? Like even if he could improve on last year, go from a 33-point pace to a 50-point pace, still not that great.
No, it's not that great. And I don't think there's much reason to think like he didn't get a real unfair play last season. The season before, when he tore up the league towards the end, everyone got super excited, and yeah, he looked legit talented. But we talked about how this quote unquote chemistry was completely unsustainable. What was it? He was with Draisaitl. Did you hear that? It was
yeah.
So loud. Okay. I'll just start Yamamoto over.
Well, no, just go from what you were saying. Say how it wasn't even, you were saying that, the chemistry that he had wasn't like sustainable.
Okay. I'll start from this.
Then you were about to ask me who he played with. It was Nugent Hopkins.
Yeah, I know who it is. Okay. This quote unquote chemistry was not something that could be sustained. Yeah, Draisaitl and Nugent Hopkins were on fire, but in a totally crazy way. And even if they're all talented, there was no way they were going to produce the way they were producing down the stretch of 1920. That said, I didn't see it cooling off to the extent that it did in 2021. And I think Yamamoto doesn't have anywhere to really look to say, like, I don't see any unfair variance. I don't even see like a huge step back. I just see someone who didn't really make the most of his position in the lineup. He was with Draisaitl and Cahoon, and we know that never worked out for Cahoon either. And this year, if Turris holds as third line center, or Ryan McLeod or someone else does it, that would mean that Yamamoto gets to play with Draisaitl and Nugent Hopkins maybe for the full season. So I think that makes Yamamoto a decent swing to take, as big a question mark as he is. I think one reason to just keep passing on him is that he barely shoots 69 shots in 52 games last season. He was really frustrating for anyone who did take a shot on him, because he didn't take a shot for the managers who picked him up. So while Yamamoto isn't a great bet for a bounce back, while Yamamoto isn't a bad bet for a bounce back, I think there's only so much I'm ready to expect, especially because I don't expect any kind of power play role. I'm wondering if it would be fair to look at Yamamoto the same way we look at Andrew Mangiapane who also has great line mates, probably is going to play within a 45 to 55 point range, has breakout potential, but low ceiling because of his role. And I think the chance available to him of breaking out isn't really that awesome. So, while Yamamoto doesn't really fit the Mangiapane kind of mold of being this good top six complementary player, I think that's about where I've got him. So say 50 points, plus or minus 5, with potential to really explode. But I think that's not something you want to bet on too heavily when you're acquiring him in a draft or trade.
Yeah, it just seems like we were talking last episode about Matt Zuccarello. I feel like Zuc is someone who I'm expecting to have more potential to explode than a Yamamoto, just because Zuccarello's getting that deployment. Like you said, it's really hard to imagine Yamamoto breaking that top power play without an injury, because Puljujarvi looked good there. And now they also have Zach Hyman jumping into the picture, who might take that spot. So yeah, I'd be a little concerned. Like, he's obviously not going to be nothing because he's going to be playing with Draisaitl, but we saw last year that maybe that's not enough for him to be like a super fantasy relevant guy. Don't forget, a lot of that really great run from 2 years ago came with McDavid injured. And so, I mean, the Oilers are definitely hoping that won't be the case again. All right, so next up, let's talk about Evgeny Dadonov, but maybe not for too long, because we just talked about him in an episode recently. We were breaking down all of the offseason transactions, but the patrons projected Dadonov for a 58-point pace with the Ottawa Senators on his new team. Instead, he paced for 30, so basically half of what we were hoping for. Interesting, David Shane, in his interview with Ben in the 32 Beats series, he said that he thinks that Dadonov is a good bet to get a shot on the top power play. Because that power play for Vegas had a lot of trouble, and they think that's one of the things that they wanted to get in Dadonov. He was really successful on the power play in Florida, so maybe he gets top power play. Probably still, I would assume, bottom 6. So hard for me to expect fantasy relevant production, even if he does get 15 power play points. So what do you think about Dadonov for next year? Was that interview with David Shane enough for you to want to give him another shot, or after you saw him in Ottawa, are you definitely not a guy I'm interested in drafting?
Well, we've seen what happens to guys who don't have great 5-on-5 deployment, but have a top power play role. They're barely rosterable, right? Unless you're hunting down those power play points and they're doing really well there. There certainly is room for him in on the top power play unit. That doesn't surprise me to hear. Also, you say bottom 6 and I say top 9 for where Evgeny Dadonov is likely to play in Vegas. But yeah, I think that ceiling is pretty low for him. I think this is probably a better fit in Vegas than what he had in Ottawa. But remember, he's still being centered at 5-on-5 by Nolan Patrick, who I hope can still be some version of the player he was expected to be when he was drafted. But if Nolan Patrick isn't, then Dadonov is playing with Nolan Patrick and Matthias Janmark, which isn't really the best situation to produce. And that's potentially only while Alex Tuch is injured, which is going to be for a couple months. But still, Dadonov isn't someone I'm about to get super excited about, because he's in Vegas. There's a lot of guys ahead of him on that depth chart. And while I don't give him full blame for his output in Ottawa, I don't think it was a match between player and team there. There's one more example of things not going well. And Ottawa was not a great place for anyone to produce last season. So I'm not going to hang a lot of what happened last season on Dadonov, but I still just don't see a clear opportunity, a clear path for him to fantasy relevance.
Yeah, I mean, I guess another player who could be on this list, I didn't put him on because we weren't so off on him, but we were a little, is Riley Smith, who had a really bad down year last year. So he was, that right wing on the line with Marchessault and William Karlsson. So theoretically, if Riley Smith continues to struggle, maybe Dadonov has a shot at taking his spot. So there is some upside there. He's someone I'll have on my watch list. I'm interested to see how he'll do on his new team.
Yeah.
Basically, Vegas traded away Marc-Andre Fleury to open up cap space that they used a big chunk of it on Dadonov. So obviously they figured he's worth something to them. So we'll see if he can deliver on what they're hoping he'll do. Next up, let's go to someone who maybe was even more disappointing than Dadonov, just because we had such high expectations for Rasmus Dahlin going into last year. I know we already mentioned really quickly how Eric Stahl didn't do much, and yeah, we were kind of high on him. But Dahlin, man, we were expecting, the Patriots projected him for 62-point pace after he had 56-point pace in his sophomore season. And so we were expecting he's only going to grow. He's finally not a teenager anymore. He's going to be 20. We expected obviously Eichel to be a big part of this team, and he wasn't. But yeah, Dahlin totally fell off. A sad 34-point pace. Of course, it was a weird year. Buffalo was weird, but also I think this year's going to be a weird year for Buffalo. So I'm not exactly sure. Can we expect him to at least approach, say, the 50-point pace that he was on as a rookie and in his second year? I'm just wondering, can we at least get him back on track somewhat? Or are you expecting another total bust last year with only that 34-point pace? At the very least, Ristolainen's gone. Not that he was any competition, but for deployment anyways. But Dahlin's gonna have all he wants of the top power play time, like lots of ice time. I'm sure Owen Power, not that he'd also be a risk, but he's been announced to go back to Michigan. So it's like, it's all Dahlin. Can he do better than a 34-point pace?
It's sad. This is a sad situation because Rasmus Dahlin, as he was coming up, I think we talked about him in the almanacs we did when we were doing our off-season audio almanacs, that as a teenager, he kept breaking records and like putting himself in elite company. So to see him be on a team that basically imploded last season, and that implosion is taking them, like, I think it's setting them back 3 to 5 years in a rebuild, potentially losing Eichel, losing Hall, losing Eric Stahl, like to some extent, not so much Eric Stahl, but
Reinhardt.
I mean, Buffalo, yeah, Sam Reinhart. Briefly, Buffalo suddenly seemed like a fun destination for a free agent to go. And now it's just like, oh no, we're going back to the dark ages. And Rasmus Dahlin is like one of the lone holdovers with elite potential who's still going to be playing there. And I mean, they need him. He had tons of time on ice last year, career high 21 minutes and 40 seconds per night, saw 70% share of Buffalo's power play minutes, but the result was terrible. And I really think you can write off the whole season for anyone in Buffalo. Throw it out for Hall, throw it out for Eichel, throw it out for Reinhardt, even like there was some good, but throw it out for Dahlin. I think the upshot for Rasmus Dahlin is that his season, I don't think, was quite as bad as it looked. Remember, this is a year where everything went wrong for Buffalo. Dahlin saw a 37% share of goals scored while he was on the ice, but his expected goal share was 48%. So that just points to like bad goaltending or bad moments, or the Sabres not cashing in as maybe they should have been. Also, only 6% of all shots taken while Dahlin was on the ice went in, that's low. That's really unfortunate. But I point to these like sad things that happened last year, and I'm looking at Buffalo this year, and so much has changed, and probably not for the better. The best possible outcome might be that the Sabres are held steady from last season. And of course, the more likely outcome is that they've gotten worse. And I don't see any indication, for all that I want to forgive Dahlin for, that he deserved much more than what he got last season. Like, there's no way I could spot him enough like regression or like sympathy points to get him all the way up to a 50-point pace. Maybe 45 points would be something I could have allowed seeing from Dahlin. Like, I still feel like that's generous, though, to say that's what he deserved. So in a draft, it's tough because his name still holds a lot of value and there's still a lot of upside there from him as an individual. But on that team, man, I just don't see a lot. Like, who's going to be on the top power play with Rasmus Dahlin? And that's why I wouldn't want him as anything more. Last year, he could be drafted as your number one defenseman, number two as well. This year, I wouldn't want him as anything more than my third defenseman on my roster, and possibly not even that. I hope to see a lot of shots from him. I hope to see some power play production, but 40 to 45 points seems like a likely range for him from what I'm seeing. And it's sad to say. It really is, especially because we've lost some high-end defensive producers over the last couple of years, and Dahlin was ready, could have stepped in, and it just doesn't seem like he's in a position where he can.
Yeah, it's interesting. In our slow draft, Mason took Dahlin and Brent Burns on the turn between, I think it was round 8 and 9. And so obviously two defensemen who were very disappointing last year. We'll see if either of them can bounce back. But yeah, I think I'm with you, Brian. I'm not expecting more than like 45 points, like at the high end. And like you bring up that power play. We would talk last episode about Jacob Chychrun, and you were saying how Chychrun doesn't have someone to play with. And I brought up like some names that I thought were at least somewhat interesting. In Buffalo, it's like really dire. Like you're asking about who's going to be on the top power play. So I guess like maybe Dylan Cousins is ready. He's 20, so we'll see. But he's probably their highest end guy at this point. They've got Olofsson. They've got Casey Middlestat, who had a bit of a resurgence last year. Then if there's no Eichel, like that's it. Like I know that before I was saying Jeff Skinner's nothing, but he still might be like their fourth best offensive player. And I don't know. After that, I'm looking at their depth chart, and it's like nobody. They brought in Vinny Hinostroza. They brought in like Anders Bjork. I don't know. It's bad, right?
It's bad. It's really bad. Like if anyone watching us on YouTube, I'm looking down the depth chart and just silently shaking my head. There's nothing there. Hope for Olofsson, Cousins, I guess does Jeff Skinner get on? I'm not to bring up Jeff Skinner again, but does he get on there just by default? It ain't pretty. I'm sorry to Sabres fans.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe you'll get a really good pick in the next draft or 5. So, okay.
I guess we should also not totally rule out. I've seen, it might have been Dauber who like shared a take on Twitter the other night saying he thinks Eichel is a Sabre until at least December. So I don't know. Like we've been following all the crazy medical drama. Would he play without getting treatment, or would he need to go get treatment first? Would Buffalo ever let him? Whatever. I wonder if there's any chance Eichel plays games. Of course, that helps Dahlin's value at least for a month or two. In that case, you could pump and dump him, right? Like try and like get him with Eichel and then sell while things are going well. But I don't even see that as a possibility. That's like a last ditch strategy move.
Yeah. Also, I also saw a take recently that like Eichel still hasn't had like the medical treatment that he wants. I don't know if he's like capable of playing right now. Like I think he wants to get this like surgery. So who even knows? Let's move on from the Sabres. I don't want to talk about them anymore this episode.
I guess the Dauber take was that he'll still be a Sabre in December, but not necessarily playing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so forget that. That was dumb. Eichel's not playing.
Yeah, forget Eichel for in general. By the way, we talked about this on the Patreon cast. Do you draft Eichel in your fantasy leagues? I said I'm a wimpy little non-leader, and I would not. Obviously, some people might want to use a late pick on him. Obviously, if you could take him, throw him in your IR, it's okay. But people wanting to use a high pick on Eichel, like you might not get many games out of him. And who knows, like, even if he plays at all, like if Buffalo has to trade him, I don't think he's gonna play for Buffalo. But okay, like I said, no more Buffalo. Let's keep the D run going. Don't talk about the disappointing D men. So another guy that the patrons projected to have a really good year was Ryan Pulock. And why not? He paced for a career high 42 points in 2019-20. Patrons were expecting maybe even a slight uptick going into last year. We projected him for 46 points on average, and instead Ryan Pulock laid an egg, only 17 points in 56 games. That's a 25-point pace. This can't be what like Ryan Pulock is, right? Like this is a guy who had already kind of established himself as a solid 40-point guy. I saw him as like the quintessential, like, you know, lock him in for 40 points. You're going to get also lots of peripherals, decent number of shots. Now Nick Leddy's gone, so you think the power play opportunities only increase for Pulock. Like there's Dobson and Pulock. That's basically it. So I don't know. I feel like whatever happened last year, I guess you'll tell me, but I still see Pulock as a good bet. Maybe like a nice potential value pick you get at the end of your drafts. Or am I dreaming here? Should I let go of Ryan Pulock?
I don't think so. I don't think you should, although I get the temptation because for years we've been waiting for him to take on a more offensive role. And especially with Noah Dobson in the picture now, it seems less and less likely that he's really ever going to get an offensive role, like clear cut, that he can really run away with. But the upside for Pulock is that maybe he still can be that steady 40, 45 point guy with a solid floor of peripherals. And the one thing I could say about Pulock that I couldn't say about Dahlin, well, actually, I could probably say it to some extent about Dahlin, but I think Pulock had more bad luck than someone like Rasmus Dahlin. Like Pulock, he played the same number of minutes the year before, and his shot rates, they felt little, but it wasn't anything that should have sent him crashing down the way he did. What did send Pulock crashing down was that he only scored twice on 121 shots on goal. And I just mentioned his falling shot rates. You know, if I only scored twice over 121 shots, I might stop shooting the puck too. His usual 5.5% shooting percentage, that would have given him another 4 or 5 goals on 120 shots. So give him some slack for that unfortunate shooting percentage. And then he had one single power play point in 56 games. Now, he doesn't have the biggest power play role, but he has a role that means I think he was really unfortunate to have that little going for him on the power play, pacing, I guess, for fewer than 2 power play points in an 82 game season. We've talked about on the last episode, we talked about a lot of guys who overperformed from the second unit. Pulock is on the opposite end of that spectrum. We're like, yeah, he paced for fewer than 2 power play points, but I think Pulock should probably be closer to, say, in the 8 to 10 power play point range this season if things normalize for him. Underneath it all, as you mentioned, Elon, Pulock has these steady hits and blocks still. So that peripheral value is still there. Nothing really changes with Leddy leaving because Pulock is righty and Leddy's a lefty. So Adam Pelech is the one who probably gains from Leddy's departure and becomes like, no doubt, top. He was already like a top pair left-handed defenseman. And
Brian, I was talking about on the power play though, to be fair. Like Pulock only played 43% on the power play and Leddy played a lot more.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Dobson is the obvious one to step in, but you're right. Pulak still has a shot, and we'll see if he gets it. I mean, this is the song we've been singing about Pulak for a few years. So I'm not banking on him getting that shot, but even if he doesn't on the top power play, I still think 40 points with peripherals is enough to make him relevant in a lot of leagues that do reward his hits and blocks.
Yeah, I'll be honest. When I was prepping for my couple draft last year, I was thinking like I just want to get a couple like solid floor defensemen, and I ended up having like Ryan Pulak and Jacob Chikrin is pretty much like the same thing. I was like, oh, a solid 40-point guy that takes some shots, has good peripherals. Lucky for me, I ended up with Chikrin and not with Pulak. I could have flipped a coin, but who knows? Maybe this year. I'm not saying Pulak is going to have a season like Chikrin just had, but the way I'm thinking of Pulak now is the same way I was thinking about Chikrin last year. So I don't know. I still kind of like him, but he was definitely a huge disappointment last year. So at least, with all these guys, you're going to be able to get them at a huge discount compared to last year. Brian, so we've got now the most heartbreaking defenseman of all, and then some interesting forwards before we end the show. And we'll get to all of them in just a sec. You're listening to Keeping Karlsson. Okay, we are back. I wonder if people listen to that insurance commercial that I recorded like a month ago that keeps playing like twice for every single episode I've been listening. But I wonder if Blue Wire is ever going to switch that out at some point. But anyway, okay, so we're back on the show, and I want to talk about Erik Karlsson. I'm just going to tear the Band-Aid off. He's a guy that we keep expecting to be better. Like going into last year, we thought, okay, he's had some injury trouble. Finally, Karlsson's healthy. He's ready to have somewhat of a return. Maybe not to his like Sens numbers, but maybe at least be a 60+ point guy. Patrons projected him for 63 points, and Erik Karlsson responded with his worst ever season, 22 points in 52 games for a 35-point pace. It's so sad. I'm tearing up reading this, Brian. Okay, so obviously, we have to say he's going to bounce back a little bit, right? Like, there's no way. Erik Karlsson's not a 35-point defenseman. I just can't accept that.
You shouldn't. I don't think you need to accept that, although he's really embarrassing us. We can't. Anyway, our show title is no longer actionable fantasy advice. Karlsson has played himself out of keeper territory, but that means that he's available in your drafts, and perhaps you should try and sneak him onto your roster at the right time. I wouldn't put him on as your top defenseman, of course. I wouldn't put him on as your second defenseman. I would be looking to him as like a third defenseman option, which is what I said about Dahlin. But if I had to pick between the two, I think I'd lean Erik Karlsson. Last season stunk for Karlsson, and that's to put it lightly. His 5-on-5 point rates were down, like they were cut in half. Like that's just that's a fancy way to say his production was cut in half. His points participation was down to 30%, which is a career low for someone like Erik Karlsson, who is just a key cog. Like he runs offense when he's on the ice. He was the Ottawa Senators offense for a large chunk of his career. But I think Karlsson can find a way back to being where he was the season prior, which was nearly on a 60-point pace. But there's reason to think that there's lots of reason to think that the days of really elite upside Erik Karlsson are definitively behind us, because last season was the second season in a row where Karlsson's shot rates were just horrific, like a far cry from his first year in San Jose and his Ottawa days before that. His second and third years in San Jose, he's not shooting as much as he's not attempting to shoot as often as he once did. And like, it's a noticeable drop. And it's a similar story on the power play too. He's not shooting as much there too. He also did suffer from a 9% on ice shooting percentage on the power play. And to just put that in context, that means that his teammates were scoring on the power play, like converting on the power play at the rate that most lines convert at 5-on-5. So even with the extra man, the Sharks couldn't turn more shots into goals than most teams do at 5-on-5. And that's not necessarily on Karlsson. So that's one reason to think, okay, so his power play on ice shooting percentage could get better. His IPP could get better, but he's been in the rep for 2 years now, and you could blame the team in front of him to some extent, but also Karlsson has been bad and absolutely not keeper worthy. Like I said, that 70-point upside seems to have disappeared. I feel like he has a shot at getting back to 60, but it's a long one. There's still upside for an explosion to think that like whatever's ailed him is over, but it's really hard to think it's going to happen. And it's not a big bet I'd want to place. I think the question for me is where do we find Karlsson between the last two seasons, where under the hood, he's looked like a similar player. 2 years ago at 60-point pace, last year at 35 points. Under the hood, he actually looked like similarly sad. So I wonder if we split the difference and we say, okay, 47 points is about what you should expect from Erik Karlsson this year. Elon, does that feel right to you? Like, would you go over or under, or tell me where you're at?
I'm going to go over, but not by much.
Yeah,
but,
I want to go over too, but we have the sentimental attachment to him. So it's really hard. I've got my Karlsson Sharks jersey hanging back there that I bought before this season. Had this season happened first, I don't know, I would have.
Yeah. No, totally. And hey, I mean, one thing that might help Karlsson is if some other players in San Jose do better. And another guy on this list is Logan Couture, who, he's a guy who the patrons pegged to be like a 65-point guy, and he totally fell off, right? Like he was less than a 50-point guy last year for, I think, the first time in his career. So I guess let's talk about Couture next. And maybe if you have some optimism about him, maybe that'll help Karlsson, though. If Evander Kane doesn't come back, he was like the leading scorer on the team, and we don't know what's going on with him. I guess as of now, we could just assume that Evander Kane's coming back. We talked about him, by the way, on the Patreon cast, if you want to hear more Evander Kane analysis. But yeah, so Logan Couture, actually, he's very similar to another guy, so I'll bring them up together. Couture and Sean Monahan, actually two players who had very similar years last year. Both of these guys were projected by the patrons to be around 65-point players. Both of them ended up pacing for less than 50. Both also had similar seasons. Both Monahan and Couture started strong and then disappeared. Like Couture is the biggest example of this. He had 22 points in his first 25 games. He was crushing it, and then he like fell off a cliff. He was doing nothing at the end of the season. In my interview with Sheng Peng, he said he thinks that Couture was hurt, which obviously makes me optimistic that Couture could bounce back a little bit, because how else can you explain just him completely disappearing like he did? Sean Monahan also 20 points in his first 26 games, right in line with the projection we had for him, and then he only managed 8 points in his final 24 games. So I know I'm throwing lots of names at you here, and I'm trying to also tie it into Erik Karlsson, but yeah, let's just focus now on Monahan and Couture. Which of these two guys do you see as like more likely to approach that 65-point projection from last year? And of course, your answer can be none of the above if you'd like.
No, I'm going to go Logan Couture, who last season you wanted desperately to proclaim like a re-broken out 70-plus point player. I was telling you to hold your horses. And of course, he did fall off after having a really great start. You mentioned that Sheng Peng on our 32 Beats series said that he thought Couture was injured towards the end of the season. That's funny because that's what your podcast with Brian Combe also said last season when we picked up on the fact that Couture's shots on goal, like night in, night out, had just gone nowhere. Like fallen off completely. He wasn't shooting the way he's used to shooting, and it shows up in his season end numbers. He actually had his fewest shots per game since, well, forever, especially like if you don't count his rookie season where he played 25 games, just 2.2 shots per game. He's seen a steady decline in his shots per game, but especially down the stretch towards the end, he was barely shooting. He also suffered on that very weak San Jose power play, just 6 power play points in 53 games. So that's pacing for, 10 or 11, which you'd expect more from someone seeing a 55% share of his team's power play minutes. But there was enough when Couture was healthy to think, look, might not be the 70-point player, but I still think he's going to be able to hit 60, 65. Elon might be a bit rich, but if the Sharks can figure out their power play and be competitive, at least when their top players are on the ice, because we know their depth chart is not the thickest, then I'm hopeful that Couture can get back to 65 points, if not just 60. Sean Monahan, I'm not even booking him for 60. He hasn't been to 60 points for 2 seasons now. 56-point pace 2 years ago, 46-point pace last season. And unlike Couture and his injury and his power play shooting percentage, I don't see a ton of excuses for Sean Monahan. The most glaring thing I see is that he was like a much higher converting shooter earlier in his career. Like he was in the low teens, approaching 15% at 5-on-5. The last 2 years, he's been an 8% shooter, and his expected goals rates haven't changed a lot. So there's reason to think that Sean Monahan should be getting closer to 30 goals as he was doing for like starting from his sophomore year. He did that for 5 years in a row. He was a nearly 30 goals or more player. But we've seen a lot of things happen in Calgary that have taken responsibility and freedom away from Monahan and Gaudreau. Like they sort of go hand in hand. Monahan is minutes dropped again. He's now down 90 seconds from what he saw 2 years ago at even strength. His power play role is still there, but like Couture, he didn't really cash in very well, just 9 power play points over 50 games, which is like still, it's more respectable than Couture's pace, but it's still not great. I don't know how much of this to hang on Monahan, but I do know that for the second or even third consecutive season, the Flames and their media and their fans all seem willing to give up on Sean Monahan and just be like, yeah, he had a couple great seasons with Gaudreau where Gaudreau was really stirring the drink and Monahan was the perfect chemist companion for Gaudreau. But lately, there's just not a lot of reason to believe that Monahan can re-find that gear that saw him in like the 60, 70, even that huge 86-point pace season that he had. So I would have Monahan, like if we're looking at 60 points as the over-under here, I'd have Couture over and Monahan under.
Yeah, I'm with you on both for sure. Definitely not a lot of faith in Monahan at this point. Obviously, there's some upside there if you want to take a swing if he falls late enough. But if he's not locked in to be centering Gaudreau on the top line, and if it's going to be potentially like a Lindholm, Gaudreau, and Tkachuk, who's that even leaving Monahan with, right? Like Blake Coleman and Mangiapane. Like I don't know. It's not someone I'm going to be betting big on. That's for sure.
Okay, exactly. Yeah. Oh no, sorry. Go ahead. Just go ahead.
Okay, so let's talk about another pair of players now. And I guess we can give the patrons a break on this one because they were two players that were traded for each other. And obviously the projections came in assuming that they were going to stay on their original teams. And those are Patrick Laine and Pierre-Luc Dubois, who both stunk last year after getting traded. Like Laine, we were projecting him for 77 points, and why not? He had a great year the previous year in Winnipeg, putting up a similar pace. Then he went to Columbus, 24 points in 46 games. So just like a shell of what he was previously. His shots on goal also cratered. He like almost in half, like 3.3 shots per game, 2019-20 with the Jets to 1.8 shots per game last year, less than 2 shots per game for Patrick Laine, who's supposed to be like this like high volume shooter. He was supposed to be like the next Ovi with the hits and the shots and the goals. And last year was like nothing like that. So I had, of course, my interview with Alison Lucan, and she said that the main reason why Laine stunk so much is because he had no one to dish to him, and he's the type of player that needs a player to feed him the puck so he could take advantage of his great shots. That's why his shots went down. That's why obviously the goals went down. And she said that's a big reason why Jarmo Kekalainen traded away Cam Atkinson, who the Blue Jackets like, but they wanted to get Voracek in exchange, who's someone who is known for being good at passing the puck and finding snipers who are able to score goals. So the Blue Jackets are going to try to help Laine succeed. He's going to be playing with Voracek. Gotta imagine he'll still be getting good deployment. So Brian, what do you think? Patrick Laine for next year, now playing with Voracek, and who knows who his centerman will be. It might be Roslovic again, or maybe someone else could climb up the depth chart, maybe Max Domi when he comes back from his injury. But yeah, do you think Laine can do better than this 43-point pace from last year? Like I'm assuming it's going to be less than the 76 pace from the year before, but can we say land at 60, or is that even hoping for too much?
I think you're about on the nose, Elon, with thinking that Laine is probably good for about 60 points. I mean, if you only looked at his numbers, you'd be like, no way he's going to get to 60 points. His shot attempt rates were cut almost in half at 5-on-5. His shot on goal rates were actually cut in half at 5-on-5. And Laine also saw 2 fewer minutes a night in all situations, including seeing his power play time and role cut. But we can't just look at those numbers because we know Columbus was supposed to be a fresh start where he could reset, but it wasn't a fresh start at all. It seemed like whatever hole he had dug himself in Winnipeg just followed him. He stayed in it when he moved to Columbus. And he was also in a line blender all year. I don't know if you remember how crazy the Columbus lines were. They were just constantly shifting while Tortorella just seemingly was never ever happy with how the team was playing. And his response to that was to keep pulling the rug out from under them. I mean, Laine had his most common centerman as Jack Roslovic and Max Domi, which okay, maybe half decent. Well, not so much Domi, but Roslovic, half decent. But again, with all the line blending, not helpful to Laine. And still, those guys are a far cry from Mark Scheifele and Brian Little, who Laine had his most successful seasons with. So here we are heading into 2021-22, and we're hoping that this is another fresh start for Laine. Like, how many resets has Laine had now? This is, I think, at least 3 by my count. But as you mentioned, Elon, this time with 100% more Jacob Voracek, and hopefully that will help Patrick Laine have some success. I mean, it's so hard to believe that Laine could be a fluke after scoring 110 goals over his first 3 seasons. And like you said, there was hype from myself included. I remember way back, like, it sounds foolish, but on our first audio almanac, this is egg on my face. So I hope everyone appreciates this about our show. You mentioned that Ovechkin could catch Wayne Gretzky's goal record. And I pitched past it and said, here's something better for you. I think Patrick Laine is on track to beat Gretzky's goal record. Like, that's the horse you want to bet on. And wow, we've come a long, long way from there. Anyway, I don't expect Laine and this reset this time around to end up with him going back to being, that 40 goal scorer that he was in his first 3 years in the league. I think there's probably a step between now and then, but what can I do but be hopeful he's going to take that step? So I think 77 points would be unrealistic. I think 70 points would be unrealistic. I expect Oliver Bjorkstrand to lead this team in scoring. So whatever you put Bjorkstrand at, and I think I'd say top 70. So that's, like, Laine's not getting that many. So I think I actually landed exactly where you did by saying about 60. But there's huge downside here. There's big upside, but there's huge downside. So when you're taking this swing with Laine in your draft, just make sure you're doing it at a proper time and you're not jumping up on him when, there's still guys with like more certain clear cut 65 point potential on the board.
Yeah. Like, I don't even think there's like such huge. Yeah, I don't even think there really is such huge upside, right? Like, I think the downside is a lot more prevalent and prominent than the upside. So I don't know. I'd maybe even take the under on 60. I'd hope he could land around there, but I'm not reaching for Patrick Laine. He's going to have to fall pretty far in my draft before I take a chance on him.
If you do draft him, who do you hope centers him? Your candidates are Jack Roslovic, Boone Jenner, I guess Texier, like, he can play the wing or center, Sean Corrali, Kevin Stenlund. Like, is there what, like, I mentioned how Laine had Scheifele and Little during his most productive years. I mean, we're not saying he's going back to those, but I don't think it's helpful that there isn't a great centerman, like an obvious centerman here to help him. He has the winger and Voracek, hopefully, but not a centerman still.
Yeah, so, well, it's part of the equation. But yeah, someone's gonna have to step up, like Sean Corrali. Who knows if maybe in a more prominent role, if he can do something. I would hope that it could be someone somewhat decent, but I mean, we have seen players in the past like do well. Like, just last year, Kirill Kaprizov had this amazing season. I know you hate it when I compare people to Kaprizov because no one's as good as Kaprizov, and I love
it.
Yeah. And it's like Laine clearly has shown he can't drive play like Kaprizov. He needs to be fed the puck, which is unfortunate. Hopefully that's something he can improve. So we'll have to wait and see. Okay, then on the other side of that trade, we have Dubois. Patrons projected him for 65, produced only out of 65. He produced only 21 points in 46 games, so not even close to a 65-point pace. He's still on Winnipeg. I have no interest in him next season. I'll be honest. Do you? Like, last year he played with Ehlers and Connor for a lot of the year, so he didn't have a problem with line mates, but he still didn't produce. I don't see anything to change, so I'm expecting not too much once again.
I'm just bringing up mock results because I think he went. Oh yeah. Okay. I also am mostly avoiding Pierre-Luc Dubois in the mock draft that we did. I was starting to compliment. I'll just do it again. I am also pretty uninterested in Pierre-Luc Dubois this season. In one of our mocks that we're doing, he ended up going in the middle of the 15th round. I was actually considering him, but I ended up taking Dustin Brown instead, just because I figure he seems still to be a pretty safe bet. But right after Dubois, Jordan Eberle went, John Gibson, Ilya Samsonov. But looking at skaters, Josh Norris, Sharangovich, Nico Hischier, That's probably the company that makes sense. Although I think I'd prefer Eberle to Dubois, but I think I'd prefer no one to Dubois. Like maybe I'd rather take a swing like Lafreniere and Puljujarvi and Kuznetsov all went in the next round, and Monahan, who we just talked about. I would actually be more interested in any of those guys than Pierre-Luc Dubois, who also saw a huge cut when he moved from Columbus to Winnipeg. It's like he left this toxic situation, went to Winnipeg, and lost 3 minutes a night, saw his lowest ever share of team power play time, just 34% share of Winnipeg's power play minutes for Pierre-Luc Dubois, down from 57% in Columbus the year before. And there's no like super unglaring unfairness in Dubois' result that I can see, like no variance that means he deserved to do better than he did. I think the kindest thing I could say for Dubois going into this year is last year was weird, both with the Columbus situation and being traded and COVID. It was a fresh start, or supposed to be a fresh start, that actually wasn't a fresh start. So look, I'm okay to hit the reset button on Dubois, and I'm okay to hit the reset button on Dubois, but just keep in mind that if you're resetting, 60 points still is probably the ceiling for what he's able to offer you. When he got 60 points in Columbus, that came with only like 10 power play points anyway. So don't, he basically always played like he had a second power play role, which he still has in Winnipeg, but he'll have a second line role too, unlike in Columbus when he was a top line player. All this to say, I don't expect him to be able to put up the same 5-on-5 scoring in Winnipeg that he did in Columbus, even though his line mates aren't terrible. Like he's probably going to play with Nick Ehlers and Andrew Kopp for starters. Maybe Paul Stastny is in the mix somewhere. Maybe Paul Stastny bumps him out of the top 6. There's a lot of reasons to be afraid of Pierre-Luc Dubois this year, and the upside beyond 60 points to me seems completely non-existent. So I will project him to be more likely around 50 points and have a pretty low shot at reaching that 60-point upside. He almost feels this upcoming season like a Mikael Backlund, like someone who plays a role down the middle on a team, and maybe he'll have a brief run, but he's not going to have sustained relevance as far as I can see.
Right, exactly. And people are still drafting Dubois. No one's drafting Backlund. So maybe people are going to need to start adjusting their expectations a bit more. So yeah, I'm with you. It's unfortunate, maybe one day, but it's really hard to bet big on a guy who you really don't see any opportunity on the power play, kind of like Yamamoto, right? Like I feel like if someone's going to get the power play on Winnipeg, give it to freaking Ehlers already before you give it to Pierre-Luc Dubois. Last year, like Paul Stastny took that fourth forward spot on the power play, on the top power play for a lot of the season. All right, Brian, let's finish this off in Detroit. Okay, so we've been talking about all these players who we expected to be superstars by this point, in Laine and like Laine and Dubois, like Monahan, and another guy who fits in with these guys is Dylan Larkin, who let us all down last year. The Patriots projected a whopping 70-point pace, only for Larkin to basically be a half-point per game guy last year, only 23 points in 44 games. He actually started strong. He had 6 points in his first 6 games, but especially after Bertuzzi went down with his injury, that was pretty much all she wrote for Larkin's fantasy relevance, and people held on to him for the upside, and he was pretty much just a disappointment. You probably wished in hindsight that you had just dropped him after Bertuzzi got injured. Now going into next year, though, we have Bertuzzi is healthy, so maybe they play together. We've got Pius Suter in the picture, which I think is probably a good thing to have a good second line center to maybe take some of the attention away from the top line. Like, maybe some of the shutdown guys now have to focus on the second line, especially there's also like Verona. Like, who knows if maybe like Detroit's a little bit more deep than they were last year, even though they don't look like so deep. They've got Moritz Seider in the picture. I don't know. Like, I got this impression that like having a good defense or maybe a slightly better defense also helps players, maybe just like help get the play going. Yeah, so all of this said, is this enough for us to at least expect, again, like I'm like with these other guys, I don't want to try to like expect them to go all the way back to what we were hoping for last year, but with Larkin, who was, like I said, like basically like a 46-point player last year, can we expect him to at least get back to like 60 for next year? And then like, how long do we have to wait? Maybe forever before we get back to like the 70+ point Larkin? Is it going to be until the rebuild is over, I guess?
Yeah, and even if when the rebuild's over, I think when the rebuild's over, ideally, Prashant has been saying this for 2 years now on our 32 Beats interviews with him, that Dylan Larkin is ideally your second line center after a successful rebuild. So I don't know that 70+ opportunity is ever going to be out there available to him again. It certainly won't be this year. But I do think 60 points could be back within reach for Larkin. Last year in Detroit, I feel like we talked about how Columbus was a mess and Buffalo was a mess. Detroit was the same. Remember at one point, Jeff Blashill was rotating like everybody off of the top power play, and Adam Ernie ended up being like one of the greatest producers they had. It was a weird year in Detroit, and I think Larkin suffered from the weirdness that was happening behind the bench, the decisions that were being made there, and all the drama with Mantha. And also, he was being hurt by some really unfortunate variants on the ice while Larkin was playing was on the ice. His teammates were shooting with a less than 5% conversion rate at 5-on-5, which is really bad. Like that's something you never that's one of the lowest numbers in the league. Usually you would expect somewhere around 9% for a forward, especially a forward playing on the top line. But in Detroit, there wasn't much help in sight. And like I said, things were really a mess. You had, like I said, Mantha going up and down and then out. You had Bertuzzi being injured. You had Larkin being bumped off of the top power play very briefly, which didn't seem realistic. And I don't expect that to repeat this year. I think last season was a write-off for Larkin. He didn't look much worse, but everyone else and everything else around him did. And that's why I'm optimistic. Maybe 60 points is still a bridge a little too far. I would hope with Rana and Bertuzzi, he can get there. I think 55 points is a safer place to project him at, but I think 60 points is definitely attainable.
All right. So, yeah, I'm hoping for a bounce back from Larkin. I actually traded him away in my Dynasty League, so I don't have to care too much about him anymore. I actually traded him for Bertuzzi and JT Miller. So I'm happy with the return. I think I gave up like a John Marino. We don't have to talk about him. Okay. We'll see what happens. So we've got a lot of potential bounce back candidates. So it seems like from this episode, Brian, for the most part, we're not expecting any of them to bounce back much. The one I'm most excited about all the players we talked about, like I said, is Ryan Fulok. So we'll see if he can make me look a little smart. I know you're not so much.
I am. I'm definitely into the value he can produce. I think you're a little more optimistic about what he can do quarterbacking the top unit, which even if he does that, Elon, it's never been a great place to produce from in Long Island. We've talked about Matt Barzal and how his upside is held back by the fact that the top power play unit is not a massive producer. The Islanders are not a great team on which to collect power play points. So I'd still say that holds him back. But yes, I think I'm with you that Pulak is the safest choice of all of these guys. If I'm picking somebody else to have a meaningful bounce back, call me sensitive. Well, I think Larkin is probably a decent bet. Couture, Erik Karlsson. I really want to say I'm with you on the over 47 points. I think he can peak up above 50, but you just have to be careful not to take him too soon.
By the way, the Islanders are an interesting team for next year. Like they still don't have like a lot of free agents signed that people are expecting them to sign. Like it's basically been assumed that Kyle Palmieri and Zach Parise are both going to the Islanders, but apparently they're like waiting. And I read like some rumors on Reddit or something that it's because they're trying to trade for Tarasenko, but like they don't want teams to know what their cap space is because they want to like, you know, not give away too much information for their trade negotiations. So like theoretically, like this Islanders team might be completely different and might have all like, you know, they might have Parise and they might have Tarasenko and who knows what they're going to do. They have Anders Lee coming back. So who knows, like, you know, maybe like Dallas, like we talked about in our last episode, this could be a team that potentially could change their identity, but I'm not going to bank on it because the Islanders have been pretty successful. So why would they? But anyway, Brian, blah, blah, blah. Let's wrap this baby up because this is the second podcast we've recorded tonight. Hopefully people enjoyed this one and the one we recorded on Monday morning with the players that the patrons were too low on. And if you liked,
I don't know if you care, but you said this is the second one we recorded tonight, and hopefully it's as good as the one we recorded Monday morning.
No, I said released.
No, you said recorded.
Okay, well, I wish you would have interrupted me at the end of the sentence.
Well, sometimes I do that, and then you say,
okay.
Why didn't you tell me sooner?
Oh, okay, you're right. Okay, so here we go. Okay, I'll go again. Blah, blah, blah. That's not for tonight. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Hopefully, we really hope you enjoyed this episode of Keeping Karlsson, going through all of these players that we and the patrons were overrating going into last season. We also hope you enjoyed the episode that we released on Monday morning, talking about all of the players that we like underrated going into the year. If you liked these episodes, then we would recommend, first of all, go back and check out some of the other shows. We've been doing shows. You might be just like getting back into fantasy hockey now and starting to, resubscribe to Keeping Karlsson. We tried to drop interesting episodes all throughout the summer. Our 32 Beats interview series, all really interesting interviews. Plus, this series we did breaking down all the offseason transactions. I'm really proud of that piece of work that we put out there. So yeah, check out all the good stuff. And then most importantly, make sure to subscribe because we're going to keep putting out content. We've got all the big guns, Brian. We've got our, gun loaded. I guess if I'm putting out the big guns, then that means we have multiple guns. I don't know what the word. I'm not a big gun guy, but
I'm more of a pacifist, really.
Yeah, but we're gonna put out some good episodes. We've got our Schmore Goalies board coming up. We're gonna have a Calder candidates episode with Victor Nuno. We're gonna look at Dom Luszczyszyn's projections. Obviously, get him on. All the shows that we're excited to. Oh, looking at the Yahoo rankings and making fun of them and talking about which players seem like good value. So there's a lot coming. So make sure you're subscribed to Keeping Karlsson. If you really like the show, want to help support us, we've got our Patreon, keepingkarlsson.com/patron, where you join our Discord community, get access to our patron casts, and of course, join the ultimate patron fantasy hockey league, the Cupful, the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League. We'd love to have you join us. You can get information about all of that at keepingkarlsson.com/patron.
No, you can get information about that at cupful.com.
I was talking about the Patreon. Why are you interrupting?
You mentioned specifically the league. You should be sharing the website.
I just said you could join our Discord. You can do this. You could join the Cupful. What's wrong with you? Either one is good.
All right. I disagree. I think.
Okay, you go ahead. Close out the show.
I'm just gonna say anchorcupful.com.
Okay, I have to keep receipt. Okay.
You want me to just do it?
No, just okay.
Okay, just cut it all out then. Forget it. Just
cut what out?
End it. Patreon.com/Keeping Karlsson, and then throw to me.
We got our Discord community, our patron cast, and of course, access to the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League, our league that we'd love for you to join and climb your way, like Brian said at the top, from the bottom tier all the way to the top. So you can get all the information about becoming a patron at keepingkarlsson.com/patron. And if you want Cupful specific information, of course, cupful.com, KKUPFL.com. It's all linked in the show notes. Don't worry about it. But okay, with that, let's cue the outro music. Brian, why don't you go ahead and read us the credits?
All right. This episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast was presented by Dobber Hockey, empowered by our patrons, especially our super supporters, Tom, Derek, Rob, and Patty. Thank you so much. Logo art by BrandonWeave.com. Outro music by Pat Roach. This episode was researched with help from Dobber Hockey, Frozen Tools, Dobber Prospects, Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Hockey, Cap Friendly, HockeyGoalies.org, Hockey Reference, Hockey Viz, Hockey Database, Elite Prospects, and NBC Sports Edge.
All right. Great job as always, Brian. I think we've got another Beat Writer episode coming out before our next episode. So yeah, we're going to keep the content rolling and we're looking forward to bringing you all that we got going into the next season.
We sure are. And going into next season, it's a great time to invite your friends into fantasy hockey and do what you can to make sure they know fantasy hockey is for everyone.
Boom. All right. Great job. 2 episodes in the can. How about that? Thanks everyone for joining. Josh, really appreciate it. Fantasy Tidbits, Adam. I'm with you on Pulak, Adam. I think it's gonna be okay. Okay. Thanks, Brian.
But some episode down the road, you're gonna say, Brian, you hate Ryan Pulak.
Yeah, why do you hate Pulak? Well, you weren't too down on him, I don't think.
No, I wasn't, but I feel like your takeaway is that I was.
No, I don't think so.
That's great. I'm so happy to.
Maybe now you've incepted it into my brain.
Oh, great.
But okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Brian. Talk to you later. Bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone.